Hello everyone, and welcome to Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting series on what if Naruto inherits the power of Alucards and become the servant of a Jinchuriki. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Alucard. Do not close your eyes. That's an order. Integra Hellsing, the head of the Hellsing organization, and the master of the most powerful vampire to walk the earth. Alucard, the no-life king, also known as Dracula. Integra wore a dark green suit, her platinum blonde hair was long, two bangs framing her face, and stopping just below her chest. Her blue eyes shined with desperation and a silent fury. Beside her, a woman named Ceres Victoria watched on with a worried expression. She had long blonde hair tied into a spiked ponytail, she had crimson-red eyes that shined with determination and slight sadness. She wore the female version of the Hellsing family's uniform. Both were watching on a screen projector as a man with long black hair was looking off into the rising sunrise. His crimson-red eyes watching the sunrise with longing and slight exhaustion. He wore an entirely black attire, though they seemed to resemble a straitjacket. Behind the two women was a man dressed entirely in white. He had blonde hair that was slicked back, few bangs slicked just above his left eye. The man's yellow eyes were shining in victory, his lips pulled back into a massive shit-eating grin. Integra. Alucard uttered softly. I am sorry, master, but that order is one I cannot follow. Alucard. Integra yelled. Ceres. Take care of master. Alucard softly requested. Ceres sniffed slightly. Why yes master, of course, she whispered in sorrow. Goodbye. Integra. Alucard said, smiling softly as his eyes slowly closed. In front of Alucard, a teenage boy watched on with angry eyes as Alucard slowly began closing his eyes. Damn it. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to fight Alucard fair and square, he thought in sadness and rage. Integra watched in sorrow as her close friend and confidant suddenly disappeared as if he never existed in the first place. She clenched her fist and suppressed the tears that were forming within her eyes. Hearing laughter, she turned her head to stare at the major. Her expression turned into one of pure rage and hatred. Her blue eyes glinting murderously as she slowly stalked towards the laughing man. Darkness was all he felt nothing, he felt weightless. He had no idea how long he has been in this dark existence of his. All he knew was that he had to solve the problem that started his little resting state. However, just when he finally decided to eliminate the millions of souls that he had stored within him to free him of this nothingness, he was suddenly assaulted with a blinding light. He slowly opened his crimson-red eyes, and he slowly surveyed the area, however he was only able to see a vast sea of nothing but pure white. Is this the purgatory? He thought in slight surprise and anticipation. Feeling a presence behind him, he instantly turned around, only to come face to face with a demonic visage. White robes, long spike white hair, a purple mox that seemed to be eternally grinning. A knife was held in its mouth, showing off yellow-fanged teeth. Eyes that were entirely black, with the iris only remaining yellow. And finally, small red horns sticking out from its head. Alucard tilted his head slightly, idly wondering who this being was. Who are you? He asked curiously. The being stared at him for several long moments, before he finally answered in a gruff and a deep tone. I am known simply as the Shinigami to all beings. I am the god of death, and the fairy to guide all souls to their spot in the afterlife. Alucard's eyes widened slightly, before they returned to normal, and suddenly he gave off a loud and booming laugh. Truly. How curious and wonderful. He bellowed. I had always wondered what death was like, and now I finally have experienced it. So tell me, what is my spot in the afterlife? It's hell, isn't it? He asked with a full-blown grin. The Shinigami tilted his head slightly. You are mistaken. You are not dead. You are experiencing a near-death experience. While your body in the living world was destroyed, you are somehow still living on. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that there are millions of souls within you that are still sustaining you. Shinigami explained. Alucard frowned slightly, but his smile returned as he looked upon the death god. I see, so tell me. What happens now, Shinigami-san? Am I to forever remain here in limbo with only you as company? He asked, a shit-eating grin on his face. Shinigami hummed slightly. I am not certain. You were not expected to die until the end of your world, yet here you are. I cannot send you back to your world, seeing as you technically died there, despite you somehow still living on. Although, there is always that option, Shinigami mused. Alucard rose an eyebrow. What option would that be? He asked in curiosity. Shinigami looked upon him with an unearthly gaze, almost as if he were judging the vampire. I could use my power, and randomly send you off into a different world altogether, however I would demand compensation for such an action. And I would alter your true form into something else. Alucard blinked once, and he regarded the death god curiously. Why would you need to alter my appearance? Shinigami stared at him with an unreadable expression. By sending you into another world, you are essentially starting a new life, thus the need to change your form into something else. You would live a new life. There wouldn't be much of a difference. You would still retain your powers, abilities, your souls within you, and your memories. You can choose to live your new life however you wish. You can even choose to live as a servant to another human should you choose to. Alucard looked upon the Shinigami with interest, though he didn't want to leave his fledgling Ceres and his master Integra alone. He knew that at one point in time he would have to leave Ceres on her own. He couldn't keep watch over her constantly. He wanted her to make her own choices, and to become independent. Something that would not happen if he watched over her constantly. As for Integra, he knew that one day he would either be resealed, or that his master would perish of old age. It tore at his immortal and blackened heart, but he had no choice but to accept it. Besides, both Ceres and Integra were strong, their will and their resolve made from steel. He believed in them. He knew they would finish the fight with Millennium. He turned his gaze upon the god of death, and he spoke. Before I give you my answer, I'm curious. What would the compensation be? And wouldn't Kami have a problem with this? To answer your first question, my compensation is simple. I want 20,000 of the souls that you have consumed. Why would you want only 20,000? Most of the souls that you have consumed are those who have committed various sins and heinous crimes during their lives. However, you have also consumed various innocents as well. With my eyes, I can tell apart the innocent souls, along with the corrupt souls within you. 20,000 innocent souls are within you. That is my compensation. Allow me to take those 20,000 souls. Alucard smirked slightly in amusement and slight surprise. Really? 20,000 innocent souls live within me? Didn't know that. I just assumed they were nobodies. I guess there is such a thing as being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The No-Life King mused. Very well then, I'll let you take those souls, not like I have another 3 million in there or something. Shinigami nodded in thanks, and continued. As for your second question, do not worry about my brother Kami. I am his brother. I am certain I can convince him to agree to this. If I can't, I'll just get Yami's assistance. Alucard nodded slightly, and the No-Life King grinned in anticipation. So when are we getting started? Right now, but first, my compensation. With that said, Shinigami dug his hand into Alucard's chest, surprising the No-Life King immensely as he let out a small grunt of surprise. The feeling of the Shinigami's cold hand digging into his very soul was strange and painful. However, he could deal with the pain. He endured being shot to shreds, and then reforming just afterwards. If he can't endure this, then he was just like those weak and pathetic vampires from his world. Seconds later, the Shinigami pulled out hundreds of small blue orbs that hovered just above his hand. Shinigami clenched his fist, and when he opened them again, the blue orbs were gone. The compensation has been taken, and now, it's time to alter your form. Which form would you prefer? The death god asked. Alucard shrugged. Form does not matter to me. I do not care what form I take, so long as I'm at least familiar with it, then I'm fine with it. Very well. Shinigami uttered. Suddenly, Alucard felt his entire form shifting and changing without his command. Soon, he felt himself getting smaller, her hair growing longer as well. He felt his entire body changing into something familiar, and changing into a form that he had only changed into just recently in order to fuck with Walter. The Shinigami conjured up a mirror in his hand and handed to Alucard. Alucard took the mirror, and he was not surprised to see her female form. The 14-year-old visage stared back at her, long silky black hair with bangs covering her forehead. Scarlet red feminine eyes stared back at her. The white outfit she usually wore when taking this form was on, and of course a white hat sitting atop her head. My girl form. Alucard said. However, she was surprised. Instead of the male voice she usually kept when in his girl form, instead it was replaced with a soft melodious tone. Her new voice was strange, but she was certain she could make it a bit more sinister. After all, she was Alucard, the no-life key queen. You did say a form you were familiar with, so I ended choosing a form that you used just recently. One more thing. Shinigami placed a finger on Alucard's hand, and suddenly, the seal that bounded her to the Hellsing family that was on her gloves disappeared. Following that, Shinigami then dug his hand into Alucard's form once more, and pulled out a very familiar form. Oh! In the Shinigami's hand was now the very cause of why Alucard was in limbo. Blonde hair stopping at his mid-neck, black cat ears atop his head, purple eyes shining nervously, and a sheepish chuckle escape as the person smiled nervously. Oh, it's you. What's your name again? Alucard, a deadpan tone entering her voice. It's Schrödinger. Schrödinger said with a twitch in his eye. I'll just call you Dinger. Alucard said, a large smirk on her features as her fangs glinted, her scarlet eyes glinting with bloodlust. Schrödinger gulped. Schrödinger, you are going to be suspending quite a bit of time with Yami. I do not pity you. With that said, Shinigami opened a portal, and tossed the catboy into the portal. The only thing Alucard could catch a glimpse was darkness, and... were those black flames? Now then, as per our agreement, I shall now send you randomly into another world. Are you prepared? Shinigami asked, making Alucard grin in anticipation. One last thing. Shinigami waved a hand over Alucard's head, and suddenly the no-life queen was assaulted with images, and the knowledge of how to create a servant seal, similar to the one the Hellsing family used to make her serve them. Why would you give me this knowledge? Alucard asked, shaking her head to rid herself of the cobwebs. You forget that I told you. You can choose to become a servant to someone else should you choose to. The knowledge is merely there should you really do choose that course of action. Now then. Shinigami held out his palm, and a green portal opened above his palm. The portal slowly hovered off his hand, and onto the floor in front of Alucard. Simply jump into the portal, and you shall be taken across time and space, across many different planes of existence and many different realities. Alucard grinned, and she eagerly began walking towards the portal. She turned her head towards the Shinigami, and she flashed him a fanged grin. Pleasure doing business with you, Shinigami-san, she said, giving a small mocking bow, before she jumped into the portal, her laughter echoing. I do not pity the world that she has gone into, Shinigami uttered. One of the main reasons why he had let the vampire leave into a new world was simple. The afterlife was not ready for that psychopath. After what felt like a lifetime, Alucard finally exited the portal, and the first thing she did was stare up at the night sky, the full moon hanging in the starry sky. Alucard grinned, showing off her shining fangs. What a wonderful night. A wonderful night for a drink, she said with a sinister giggle, her scarlet eyes glinting with bloodthirst. She sniffed the air, seeing if she could catch the scent of any living being. And she did. She was able to catch the scent of vast number of humans deeper into the forest, and an even larger number of humans a bit further away. Perhaps they are currently partaking in war, she mused. However, she perked up when she caught the scent of blood, fresh blood. Her scarlet red eyes instantly zoomed in on a puddle of crimson liquid. She grinned widely as she advanced upon the puddle of blood. She quickly bent down on her knees, and her head leaned over the blood like a predator. Her tongue slowly emerged from her mouth, and she gave long and savoring licks to the puddle of blood. After several licks, she suddenly froze, her scarlet eyes widening in surprise and glee. This blood. It's more delectable than Intergress. This is by far the most delicious blood I have ever had the pleasure of drinking. Curious as to who had such delectable and delicious blood, she viewed the memories that the blood would no doubt contain. What she saw made her laugh hysterically, a gleeful undertone in her voice. Her eyes glinting madly with insanity and slight happiness. The memories she saw were that of a young boy's. A boy with spiky sun-kissed blonde hair, sapphire blue eyes, and whisker marks on his cheeks. The last memory she was the boy being chased into this very forest with a large mob following behind him. Through the blood, she was able to also feel the emotions the boy was feeling. Fear, desperation, the desire to live, hopelessness. However, the will to never give up, or back down despite the situation. She was also able to see deeper into the blonde boy's heart. The boy had compassion and kindness that far exceeded beyond even what she expected. Yet, he had also a vast amount of hatred, a hatred that may even one day grow to surpass even hers. A hatred that may, if left unchecked, may destroy the world. And she would be the instrument of the boy's hatred, rage, and wrath. Uzumaki Naruto, a strong and fitting name. You will make a splendid master. With that thought, Alucard stood and slowly strolled deeper into the forest, a slight skip in her step as her grin threatened to splint her face in half. Uzumaki Naruto was both angry and terrified at the moment. The recently turned 7-year-old's day had started out quite normally. Wake up in his shitty apartment, wander around the village while ignoring the hateful glares and harsh whispers of the villagers. Then, somewhere in the day, prepare a prank as payback to some of the more vocal villagers. All in all, it was simply a normal day for him. Of course, while he kept up the mask of a smiling idiot, he was a lot different in terms of personality than what he let the villagers see. While the villagers saw a constantly smiling idiot, he was surprisingly a lot smarter than most people for a 7-year-old. He wasn't as smart as Inara. No one could be as smart as Inara, but he was smart enough to be considered in the league of a genius. And while he may seem to have a happy-go-lucky attitude, he could absolutely with certainty that he hated most of the villagers in Konoha. However, he was not petty. He could handle glares, whispers, and all the insults. Those were nothing. It was the other things that they did that made them hate them. Beating him once in a while, kicking him out of shops, and sometimes defacing his apartment. That made him hate them so much. If he had the power, he would make those who made him suffer so much pay. But he didn't, and there wasn't a way to get stronger because the librarians usually never let him go in the library. The only way for him to get stronger is to join the academy next year. But he would be forced to hide his progress over the years, and continue to be the idiot they thought he was. Another thing was that he knew they would sabotage his grades in the academy to make him seem even worse of an idiot. But while he hated most of the villagers, there were those he did not hate. Like the Ichirakus, his somewhat surrogate family, the Sandaime Hokage, his grandfather figure, and finally Inu Ni-san, the Anbu who always protected him when given the chance, and who sometimes bought him stuff to make his living conditions more lively. After wandering around the village until the sun began to set, he quickly began to head back to his apartment, and that was when things took a turn for the worst. As a large mob of villagers had formed, and they began to chase him out into the forest. The worst part was that in the mob were some shinobi, and that made getting away even more difficult. He had no choice but to run deeper into the forest in an effort to get away from the mob. He had gotten hit with a kunai in the shoulder, causing his blood spurt out, and land onto the ground below. However, he paid no attention to that, and instead continued running deeper into the forest. Minutes later, he was pelted with several more kunai, each one hitting his legs, causing him to crash onto the floor. He had quickly dragged himself to a tree, and began yanking out the kuani impaled to his legs and shoulder. Of course his injuries began healing shortly after the kunais were removed, and the blonde-haired boy was prepared to shoot up from the ground and continuing from his pursuers. That plan was shot down when a foot slammed itself to his chest, keeping him pinned down to the tree he was leaning against. And he felt desperation, fear, and slowly brimming anger as the mob began to advance upon with the intent of harming him and beating him senseless. And that led to the blonde's current situation at the moment. The mob currently beating him, while he himself curled into ball, protecting his torso from being injured. This continued for several minutes before they stopped, and the blonde was able to hear the mob's voices as they all began to say that it was time to finish what the Yondaime started. Naruto's panic increased as he noted that they began to pull out bladed weapons, each intended to tear into his skin. However, before they could go through with their intention to maim the blonde, soft and sinister giggles broke through the forest. "Truly you dogs amuse me so. You are so weak that you must beat on a child to prove you are strong. How weak and pathetic each of you are." The villagers, unnerved by the voice seeming to come from every direction, all glared in all the directions where they believed the voice was coming from. "We do not know who you are, stranger. But that is no child. It's a monster in human skin," one of the villagers roared, with the rest shouting in agreement. "Oh, a monster you say? The voice began once again. The villagers all nodded their heads, their cries of the blonde being a monster being heard. Naruto felt whatever hope he had being melted away as he was sure that whoever was watching now believed him to be a monster. He grit his teeth, and prepared to endure, as it was the only thing he could possibly do. However, the forest became eerily silent as the shadows began to rise, and begin to take shape. Everyone watched in fear, and shock as the shadows took the shape of a girl no older than 14. Long black hair flowing down towards her back, her bangs covering her forehead, scarlet red eyes that shined with bloodlust. She wore an entirely white suit, a black tie, and undershirt being worn under. A white hat rested atop her head, and she wore white gloves. The girl was grinning widely, showing off shiny white teeth and fangs. Her eyes were glaring at the mob with murder, and as if they were the source of all the problems in the world. A desire to kill, maim, and torture the people in front of her. "You call this boy a monster?" she softly began, her voice sending shivers down their spines. "But there is only one monster I see here." At this point, her eyes gleamed with insanity. "That monster is me." With gleeful and maddening laugh, the girl lunged, her teeth sinking into the neck of a villager, and with a champ, the head was severed from its body. The villagers screamed in horror and terror. The few shinobi in the mob took their kunais and pelted the girl with deadly precision. Alucard merely grinned as the kunai all impaled her body, and she doing to stop them. Finally, the shinobi stopped, and the villagers felt relief when they saw the girl's body on the forest floor, pelted with kunais and various injuries. Naruto looked upon the scene with shock and slight foreboding. Why did he get the feeling that it wasn't over? The blonde's question was answered when the body twitched, and blood began rising from the ground, and was absorbed into the body. Before everyone's eyes, all of the injuries the shinobi had inflicted began healing, and soon, the girl was standing, looking at them with her large grin still intact. "Dogs can't kill me," she said, her voice echoing across the clearing. "Only men can kill monsters." With that said, she lunged, and she was tearing into the villagers as if it were nothing. Limbs, heads, and organs were thrown all over the clearing, blood splattering everywhere as the girl showed no mercy in killing all the villagers. In fact, she was laughing gleeful and loudly, as if she was just a child playing in the park. Moments later, everyone in the mob was dead, all but one, and that was a whimpering and cowering civilian who was currently leaning against a tree. Alucard slowly looked at him, her eyes glinting with bloodlust. "I said that only men can kill monsters," she began. "So what are you? Are you a dog, or are you a man?" she asked mockingly, taking slow and taunting steps. The villager brought up his weapon, and small knife, and dragged it across his throat, killing himself. Alucard frowned, and she grunted in annoyance. "I hate when they puss out like a bitch," she murmured. Her grin slowly returned, and she turned her head towards Naruto. Her grin increased slightly, and she slowly stalked towards her soon-to-be new master. Naruto didn't know to what think as he watched the girl walk towards him. When he saw her decimate the mob of villagers, instead of fear and horror, he felt satisfaction as the villagers all died by her hands. When the girl turned towards him, he expected her to look at him the same way she looked at the villagers. But she wasn't. Instead, she was gazing upon him with an almost loving gaze. The girl suddenly got on her knees to reach his level, as he was sitting on the floor, his back against a tree, her face was close to his own, much too close for his liking. On pure instinct, Naruto grabbed a kunai that was scattered about the floor, and nearly drove it into the girl's neck. However, he stopped himself just in time, the tip of the kunai just barely grazing the girl's neck. If anything, her grin got wider at Naruto's course of action. "Hello," she purred, staring at the blonde through half-lidded eyes. Naruto gulped. Hey," he responded questionably. The girl did nothing, almost as if she was content to simply stare at him, and Naruto was already getting tired of her invading his personal space. "Why did you help me?" Naruto asked slowly, as if he himself still could not believe that someone was helping him. Alucard tilted her head, and she smirked. "Why wouldn't I wish to protect my new master?" she stated. Naruto froze, and he looked at her with disbelief. "Master," he murmured. Alucard nodded her head eager, her long raven locks brushing against the blonde's face. Yes. Well, should you accept to become my new master? If not, I'll just continue hounding you until you do. Why? Why would you want to become my servant? Naruto asked. Alucard's smirk grew. Why wouldn't I want you to be my new master? I've tasted your blood, and it's more delicious than my previous master's. I've seen your memories, and your will is stronger than my previous master's. You are strong, in mind, spirit, your heart is strong as well. You have the perfect qualities to become my master. Why wouldn't I want someone strong to become my master? But in terms of physical power, I am weak, Naruto dejectedly said. He felt a hand caress his cheek, and his blue eyes locked with Alucard's scarlet ones. You can be a feeble old man, and I would still choose you as my master. You are already a beautiful creature in my eyes. While physical power does indeed hold much merit, I'd rather focus on the strength that is in your heart, mind, and soul. So I ask again, will you allow me to serve you, master? Will you allow me to be the instrument of your wrath? Naruto stared deeply into her eyes. He saw many things in her eyes: insanity, a disregard for the lives of others except those she held close. He saw the deep-seated hatred in her soul, yet he also detected a fierce loyalty and devotion. Gulping, Naruto made a decision that would change his life forever. What's your name? He asked. My previous masters gave me the name Alucard, was Alucard's instant reply. Should I take you as my servant? Do you promise to never abandon me? To remain by my side until the end? To fight alongside me in every battle? To crush my enemies into nothing but a smear on the ground? To hear my enemies plead for mercy, only to receive none? The blonde asked seriously. Nothing shall please me more, master. Alucard gleefully answered. Then, I shall accept you as my servant. Alucard, what is the requirements need to make this possible? Allow me to handle this, master. With that said, Alucard rose her hands up, and suddenly, the blood on the grass began to rise, and began to swirl around the girl's hands. Soon a circle appeared on the back of the girl's hands. The circle held similar symbols to that of the one she used to have when she served the Hellsing, except there was no star in the middle. With a large grin, Alucard turned her eyes towards her new master. All that is left is for me to drink your blood, master. With only a moment of hesitation, Naruto used the same kunai he nearly stabbed Alucard with and cut himself across his hand. Alucard was quick to grab hold of his hand, and she began to lick the blonde's bleeding hand, making Naruto flush scarlet at her actions. Alucard giggled slightly as her new master's flustered look, and she watched in glee as a swirl appeared in the middle of the circles on the back of her hand. The runes shined brightly before they dulled. With a large grin that threatened to splint her face, she gently took the blonde in her arms circling around the blonde's body as her head rested atop his. The ceiling is complete, master. I am now under your command. I will follow any order you give to me, and your wrath is now my wrath. Your sorrow is my sorrow. Your hatred is now my hatred. Your enemies are now my enemies. I shall kill thousands, millions, billions in your name, master. All you must do is give the command, Alucard announced, her eyes glinting gleefully. That sounds nice, Naruto murmured, his face being extremely flushed as Alucard held his form close her. Soon the day's events finally caught up to him, and he felt exhaustion as he felt his eyelids dropping. Rest, master. I shall deal with everything until you awaken. Alucard softly spoke in his ear. Heeding her advice, Naruto allowed sleep to overcome him, and he unconsciously snuggled in his new servant's arms. The clearing was silent for several moments, before Alucard slowly began to tremble. Her form was shaking uncontrollably until suddenly, she threw her head back and laughed loudly. Her mad laughter echoed into the very night itself, scaring away any predators who were attracted by the smell of blood. Her eyes were shining ominously in the night, a scarlet glow that could be seen from miles. Her fangs out in the open for all to see, giving off one more bark of laughter, and a fanged smirk. The shadows began rising up, and they quickly surrounded her, and her new master's form. She held on to her master lovingly, before the shadows consumed them, and they were gone from the clearing. Across the other end of the forest, within the village of Konoha, inside Naruto's apartment bedroom, the shadows rose and expanded in mass and size. Almost like a tattered cape, the shadows split apart and revealed the form of Alucard holding her master gently but firmly. Slowly, Alucard lowered her master on the only bed in the room. She smiled at her master's sleeping visage, before she scowled as she looked around the apartment around her. Such a disgusting and disgraceful place. My master deserves much more than this. Perhaps I can make this place much more fitting, she thought. Although first things first. There are no other occupants living within the apartment complex, thus I can safely assume they left because they did not want to live near my master. The only other person who lives here must be the owner of the building, as I can sense his presence a few floors below. A smirk settled itself on her vampiric visage. She giggled sadistically to herself. Silently, she phased through the ground beneath her, and she continued to phase through the floors until she reached the floor where the owner lived. Quickly, she stalked down the halls, turned a corner, stopped at the door at the end of the hallway, and knocked several times. Moments later, a man in his 30s opened the door. He had shoulder black hair that was matted down against his head. His black eyes expressed annoyance. "What do you want now, demon brat?" The man stopped speaking when he noted that, instead of the blonde brat who lived several above him, in his place stood a girl with long black hair whose outfit consisted entirely of white. Her eyes were red, but much brighter than Yuhi Kurenai's, and they held a more sinister gleam to them. He had no idea who the girl was, but judging from how expensive her outfit looked, she was obviously of noble birth. Thus, his attitude did an entire 180. "How may I be of assistance, Oju-sama?" he asked politely, and in a friendly manner. Alucard fought the urge to scowl at the man in front of her. Having used her telepathic abilities, she was quickly able to detect the obvious dislike towards her master. She wanted to kill him immediately, but she needed him alive for the moment. Once his use was no longer required, maybe her master wouldn't mind if she had a snack. "Yes," Alucard began. "I was hoping we could discuss the ownership of this building," she said. "What do you mean?" the owner asked, confusion in his voice. In response, Alucard lifted her hand, and pressed her finger to the man's head. "You are going to invite me to your room, and you are going to bring me the deed to this apartment complex," she murmured, her eyes shining a sinister bright red. "Yes, of course. Please come in, I shall bring you the deed," the man said hollowly, his eyes blank as they shined a dull red color. Grinning, Alucard walked through the door, eyes flashing crimson as a sinister chuckle escaped her lips. She used her telepathic abilities to forcibly close the door behind her. Outside the room, it was silent for several long moments, before a brief sound of pain was heard. A moment later, it was silenced. The next morning, Naruto awoke with a groan as the sunlight shined upon his whiskered face. He opened his eyes, and glared at the sunlight entering his room. He got up, and gave a drawn-out yawn. He scratched his head, and suddenly, the events of last night assaulted his brain. He frantically looked around the room, searching for any evidence that last night had happened. Sadly, he could find nothing. Frowning, the blonde looked at his hand. "Was it all a dream?" he murmured. "Was that girl even real?" "I can assure you, master, that I am quite real. For if I wasn't, then how could I be standing in front of you?" a soft voice said beside him. Blinking, the blonde turned his head, and his vision was assaulted by red. Blinking rapidly, the blonde leaned back, and he was able to see the girl from last night. Her face being inches away from his, her red eyes being the reason why his vision was blocked by a red color. She was so close that the color of her eyes were the only thing he could really see until he leaned back. The girl remained where she was, not moving from her position, although she did crack the blonde a wide grin. "Alucard?" Naruto asked slowly, as if he still wasn't sure she were real. "Yes, master?" was Alucard's immediate reply. Naruto didn't respond immediately, instead his mind was focusing on the events of what happened last night, and he blurted the first thing that came to his mind. "What are you?" he asked bluntly. Let it be known that he was never discreet. "I am a monster, master. A vampire," Alucard answered, a sick grin on her face. Naruto blinked. "Vampire?" he asked, bewildered. Alucard eagerly nodded. "Yes," she purred. "Then, why aren't you burning in the sunlight? You standing right in front of it?" the blonde 7-year-old asked. And it was true, the girl was standing directly into the sunlight's path. Alucard chuckled slightly at her master's question. I am a special vampire master. I have an immunity to all the weaknesses a normal vampire would have. At best, sunlight is but a minor annoyance to me, she answered, a hint of arrogance in her voice. Naruto rose an eyebrow at her. Prove it. Show me your fangs, he asked. He did remember her licking his blood last night, but that didn't mean she was really a vampire. In response, Alucard smiled widely, her lips parting revealing her sharp fangs. Naruto stared wide-eyed at her fangs. He could tell the difference between fake teeth and real ones. For starters, fake teeth were not as bright than real ones when cleaned. Generally, they remained the same color. Also, with his nose he was able to pick up on scents that a canine could pick up on. Fake teeth had a rubber-like scent on, or a metal scent, or even the scent of wood depending on the material they were made from. However, Alucard's teeth did not have the scent of any of them. That meant they were honest-to-God fangs, and that meant she was an honest-to-God vampire. You truly are a vampire, Naruto whispered. Alucard nodded, her grin remaining on her face. Naruto slowly rose his arm, and his hand slowly reached out towards Alucard. He stopped for a moment, looking to see if Alucard would object. She didn't. She remained there with the same wide smile, her scarlet eyes staring intently into his. Naruto gulped, and placed his hand on Alucard's cheek. It was cold, yet at the same time, to him it was comforting. Alucard leaned into the blonde's touch, her eyes closing as she snuggled into her master's touch. Back when she served Integra, the woman had hardly ever graced her with even a single touch. She savored it, the touch of her master was wonderful to her. Feeling a hand on her chest, she opened her eyes to see her master having his other hand resting on her chest. No heartbeat, she heard him murmur. Feeling mischievous, the no-life queen wrapped her arms around her new master, and she whispered into the blonde's ear. Why my new master is so frisky and perverted. If you wanted to experience a woman's body, all you had to do was ask master. Immediately she felt her master's embarrassment as her master's 7-year-old face turned into an excellent shade of scarlet. His blue eyes quivering cutely. And no, why you got it all wrong. I was just curious if you had a heartbeat. Alucard snickered at her master. He was so fun to tease and fluster. She was going to enjoy her time with him. Moments later, a comfortable silence ensued. Alucard was content to hold her master, while Naruto himself enjoyed the Alucard's embrace. Despite her void being cold, and not having a heartbeat, he enjoyed being held by her. To him, her presence was warm, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. Alucard, Naruto began, catching her attention. Last night you said you would never abandon me. That you would remain by my side until the end. That you would stick by me no matter what. Did you mean it? Alucard smiled genuinely at her master. I meant every single word, master, she answered, nuzzling her cheek against her master's hair. After I went to sleep. What else happened last night? Naruto asked, satisfied with Alucard's answer. Well, after you heeded my advice and rested, I took you straight home and proceeded to negotiate with the owner of this apartment complex. Congratulations, by the way, on being the new owner, master. How did you get him to agree to that? The guy's an asshole, Naruto interrupted. Alucard grinned. I have my ways, she answered. Naruto stared. You killed him, didn't you? He asked. Maybe, she immediately answered. Once again Naruto stared before he suddenly shrugged. Like I said, he was an asshole anyway. Continue. After that, I summoned my familiars and began to clean the apartment. Familiars? Naruto interrupted once again. In response, Alucard pointed a finger to open door leading into the hallway. Naruto looked, and he caught sight of a large black dog with multiple eyes walking down the hallway with a trash bag in its mouth. Naruto stared. I'm not going to ask, he murmured. After my familiars began cleaning the apartment, I set about looking for a place to sleep, yet nothing suited me. So I decided to sleep next to you until sunrise, master. She meant that too. She looked all over the place that was dark enough, yet nothing really suited her. She looked for something that resembled a coffin, but sadly nothing in the building could be used as a makeshift coffin. She could have built one, but she was too lazy that night to go about doing it. She wished she didn't have to leave behind her coffin before she left to this world, but what can you do? Thus, with her options limited, she decided to sleep with her master on the same bed. Besides, she actually enjoyed her master's warmth. Not to mention her little master was quite clingy while he slept. That amused her. Wait, you slept in the same bed as me? Naruto exclaimed, his face a beet cherry red. Yes, master, I also recall you being extremely clingy during the night. Alucard answered. Naruto's flush increased, and the blonde could only look down in embarrassment. Regaining his composure, the blonde took a deep breath. Was that all you did during the night? He asked, curious as to what else she did. That was all, master, she answered. Naruto nodded. Okay, I should get dressed and prepare breakfast. Alucard tilted her head. You tidy up, master, I shall prepare breakfast. With that said, she seemed to glide across the room towards the hallway. The door behind her closed, and she continued onwards towards the kitchen. Reaching the kitchen, she quickly set about the task of making breakfast for her little master. She was glad she knew how to cook. One of the best things of drinking someone's blood was that not only did you get their memories but also their skills. She consumed several chefs during her life on Earth, of course some of them were innocent and clean of sins. Although she believed 2 or 3 committed sins and or heinous crimes, seeing as she can still sense their souls within her. Roughly 40 minutes later, she sensed her master entering the room. By that time, Alucard had already set the table, and a breakfast fit for a king was resting on the table, waiting for her young master to devour it. Entering the room, she noted her master wearing a white shirt with a red swirl on it, similar to the one she had on her gloves. He also had on a pair of blue shorts. She mentally frowned at his attire. She would have to fix that once he was done with breakfast. Alucard, you didn't need to go this far, Naruto murmured as he stared at the food before him. One had a plate of 3 sunny side-up eggs, another had a dozen strips of bacon with buttered toast next to them, while the last one had a large stack of pancakes. Off to the side was a tall glass of orange juice. My master deserves only the best, was Alucard's immediate reply. Naruto sat down, and began eating the breakfast prepared for him. He froze for a split second, before he began eating again, his pace a bit faster than before. A minute or two later the blonde-haired child was drinking the glass of orange juice completely. The other plates empty except for crumbs. That was amazing, Naruto complimented, wiping his lips. I am pleased you think so, master, Alucard said, giving a small bow as she gave a pleased smile. Naruto smiled at the vampiric girl, before he frowned slightly. Why didn't you eat anything? He asked. Alucard chuckled. I'm a vampire, master. All I require is blood, she stated. Blood, huh? The spiky-haired blonde murmured. He dug into his pocket, and pulled out the kunai he kept from last night. Placing the kunai at the base of his palm, he dug it into his flesh. Biting back a hiss of pain, he removed the kunai, and held out his bloodied hand for Scarlet-Eyed Girl. Alucard's attention was focused directly upon Naruto's bleeding hand. Slowly, she got closer to her master, and gently she took her master's hand. Bringing it to her lips, she allowed her tongue to slide out of its confines, and she began licking the blonde's bloodied hand. The 7-year-old felt himself flush, but kept it down. With the way he lived, he was not as naive as people thought. While his body was still that of a child, and to some extent his mind as well, generally his mindset was that of a preteen. Having her fill of blood, Alucard stopped, and leaned back. Thank you for the meal, master, she said as she let go of the blonde's hand. Naruto absently nodded, watching as his hand healed. Once it was healed completely, the blonde stood, and made his way towards the door. Intent on leaving outside the apartment. Because he could take a step further, he felt Alucard's hand on his shoulder. Looking at her with confusion, he decided to hear what she had to say. Master, before you leave, I suggest a change of attire. I will not allow my master to walk in such filthy clothes when you deserve better, she stated. Naruto frowned. These are the only clothes I have, he murmured. Fret not, I shall take care of it, Alucard declared. With a snap of her fingers, the shadows rose up, and engulfed Naruto's body, making him yelp in surprise. A moment later the shadows parted, revealing Naruto's new appearance. He had on a white dress shirt, over that he wore a black suit jacket completed with black pants. He had a crimson tie, and a black hat rested atop his head. Alucard frowned as she looked upon it. "No, it doesn't suit you, master." With that said, she snapped her hands, and the shadows rose up, and covered the blonde's body again. When the shadows parted again, this time the blonde was dressed in an entirely different attire. This time the blonde was dressed in robes. The robes consisted of a light gray long-sleeved hooded shirt with a sleeveless dark brown leather wrapping, trousers, leather calf braces, leather wrap arm bracers, a white sleeveless surcoat, and leather footwear. Jedi adventure robes from Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. Alucard hummed. "It's good, perhaps when you age more, master. Perhaps a simple yet elegant yukata shall suffice." With that said, the shadows rose and engulfed the blonde once more. They parted not a second later, and Naruto was shown to be in a crimson-red yukata. A decoration of what seemed to be various yellow swirls resembling whirlpools were etched upon the attire, and they were arranged so elegantly, and in such a manner that Naruto could have been mistaken for a prince. Which technically he was. "Perfect," Alucard chirped. Naruto stared at her with a deadpanned expression. She called this simple. This yukata would probably be worth a small fortune, what with how regal it looked. Shaking his head, he thanked Alucard for her help, and prepared to leave the room. He stopped, however, and looked at Alucard curiously as she seemed like she was going to follow him. "You're coming with me?" Naruto asked. Alucard grinned slightly. "Why, of course, master. I'm not going to let you walk around alone in this disgusting village full of worms," she stated. "But, if anything, they might try to take you away from me." Naruto frowned. "They can try, master. But I do have a method to follow you without anyone ever noticing," she stated. A moment later, her form was slowly merging with Naruto's own shadow, until finally she had completely merged with it. "Alucard?" Naruto asked, blinking owlishly. "Yes, master." Alucard's voice sounded within his head. Naruto looked around for several moments, before he stared at his shadow. "You're speaking to me through your mind, aren't you?" he thought. "Correct, master," was her reply. "I see." Naruto thought back. This was useful, extremely so. Not only would she be with him almost constantly, but they could keep in constant contact. "Alucard, when we walk around the village, you may hear some of the villagers whisper insults at me, and glare at me. Do not do anything to him." "But master." "No buts. Insults, whispers and glares are nothing I cannot handle. Insults are just words, and glares are just eyes that gaze upon me. They cannot do any true harm. However, should they try to inflict physical harm, you're free to do with them as you see fit." Naruto finished sternly. He didn't need to see Alucard to know that she had the most bone-chilling grin set upon her features. "Of course, master," she finally replied. Nodding at her reply, Naruto left the apartment building, and proceeded to walk down the streets of Konoha. During his trek, various villagers would glare, and whisper harsh insults to the blonde. The villagers were also surprised by Naruto's clothing, and they quickly assumed that he had stolen them from a noble. Of course, Naruto paid them no mind, content to merely ignore them. However, while Naruto was simply content to ignore them, Alucard was not. At times the blonde's shadow would writhe and bristle. At times it seemed as if they were going to lash out and kill the villagers, but they did not. Instead, they restrained themselves, albeit barely. The civilians did not notice, but the various shinobi in the crowd did, but they wisely chose to not inquire any further. Instead, they chalked it up to Inara watching over the blonde. Hours later, around noon, Naruto reached the park, and he could only stare in envy as the kids his age were playing together, including a girl with pale blonde hair, and a girl with pink hair. He looked off to the side, and his envy grew as he saw the parents of those kids looking on with happy and loving expressions. How he longed for someone to look at him with eyes such as those instead of the usual scornful and hateful ones. "It's okay, master," he heard Alucard say through their mental connection. A moment later, he felt arms encircle around him, and he felt his small body being pressed against another. Following that, a soft voice soon whispered in his ear. "I am here, master. I am all that you require. Those offspring of the filth you see before you will only drag you down. You reside on a pedestal that they will never attain, master. Such filthy dogs are not worthy to call themselves your friend. Friends are below you, master. Do not bother with such useless things." Naruto stared at the scene for a moment longer, before he looked into Alucard's eyes. One look into her loving eyes, and he knew his answer before his mind could process it. You're right, I don't need any of them. You're all I need. With that said, Naruto briskly turned around, and continuing striding the street, not once looking back. Alucard grinned as she merged with her master's shadow. Before, I had a master who could command me to slay dozens without remorse, a fledgling who loved only me. Now I have a master who will love only me. A master who will not be held back by attachments or loyalties to other causes. Although, the only loyalties he may have will be for the Sandaime Hokage and this Ichiraku family. But his love will belong to me. A master who does not despise me, a master who will not keep me locked away. A master who will love me, and me only. Truly, this makes me blissful, Alucard thought, as Naruto's shadow grew a large grin with two eyes staring at his back with love and devotion. Naruto's shadow quickly reverted back to normal as they began entering a more populated area. No one shall take away my master. He is my master, and only I shall decide who is worthy of him. Those who try to take my master away, and want to be with my master, shall have to get through me. Was Alucard possessive, and final thoughts on the matter as she paid more attention to her master's surroundings. She wanted one of these foolish villagers to try and harm her master. That way, she could leave a bloody smear on the floor. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on who you're asking, a villager did gain the courage to try and attack Naruto in the afternoon. Alucard had quickly advised her master to lead the man into a secluded area, and the blonde-haired boy listened to Alucard's instructions. The villager, unaware of his impending doom, had followed. He had found Naruto waiting deep in the alley, and when he advanced upon the blonde, Naruto's shadow had morphed into Alucard, her crimson eyes flashing malevolently, and lips grinning widely. Her right arm had shifted into a very familiar hellhound, and the villager was promptly devoured. From then on, when Naruto returned to walking down the streets after leaving the secluded alley, there were no other attacks on his person. Now however, the blonde was in his apartment eating dinner that Alucard had prepared, while the no-life queen herself was tidying up her master's bedroom. Fluffing her master's pillow, Alucard observed her handiwork. Perfect, she stated as she looked upon the sparkly clean room. Seriously, the room was fucking sparkling. Walter, eat your heart out. She grinned as she imagined Walter's shocked expression. She could imagine the words he would say to her. You mean to tell me you could have cleaned the estate better than me? If that's the case, why didn't you help at times? She imagined him saying. To which her response would be, Meh, I find it amusing watching you fret over cleaning the estate. Too bad she wasn't gonna miss Walter anytime soon. Satisfied with her work, Alucard turned around, and prepared to leave her master's room when she saw something that honestly surprised her. In front of her, right next to the door, was her coffin, the very same one she had used since becoming a vampire. She blinked as she noted the sticky note that was on it. Shrugging, she took the note, and read it. Thought you might have wanted this wasn't easy to obtain by the way. Sincerely, Shinigami. She rose an eyebrow at the letter, and its details. She shrugged nonchalantly, and chalked it up as the Shinigami being unusually generous. She made a mental note to be more suspicious if the Shinigami did her any more favors. She hummed as she tried to think of a good place to put her coffin, perhaps she could place in the darkest spot in the apartment. However, a lot of places were dark in the apartment, and she had no idea which one was the darkest. Perhaps her master would know. With her mind set, Alucard quickly set her course towards her master, intent on asking him her question. She arrived just in time to see her master set his plate in the sink. The blonde seemed like he was about to wash it, but Alucard immediately intercepted. Master, it's not your place to wash the dishes. Please allow me, she said. Naruto frowned at her, but I always wash my dishes. He lightly complained. Alucard smirked in response. That's because you did not have anyone to do it for you. I shall take care of your basic needs and such. There is no need for you to bother yourself with such trivial things. Alucard stated. Naruto frowned once more, but conceded, although he did grumble to himself as he sat on the couch. It didn't take long for Alucard to finish washing the dishes, and she immediately stood behind her master. May I impose a question, Master? She asked. You just did, but I suppose I can let you ask a second question. Naruto said as he took the remote to the TV, and began fiddling with it. Alucard smirked at her master's words. I was simply wondering where the darkest part of the apartment was. She asked. Naruto hummed slightly. The darkest part, huh? Come to think of it, there was always this one part of the apartment that was always blocked off. I believe I heard some of the people who used to live say how this building was the former T&I department before it was decommissioned. Why was it decommissioned? Something about not having enough cells for future inmates, or whatever. I never bothered learning anything more about it, Naruto said. I see, Alucard murmured, a grin slowly working its way on her lips. It sounded like the perfect place for her coffin. Why do you ask? Oh, nothing. Just thinking it's the perfect place for my coffin. She answered. Isn't a coffin where you vampires sleep? Naruto asked, receiving a confirmation from Alucard. I see, so I take it you'll be using your coffin to sleep in from now on. He stated. Alucard could not resist the opportunity to tease her master at that moment. Is Master upset that I will not be sharing his bed with him anymore? She said teasingly. Immediately Naruto blushed scarlet, and no. Why, you got it all wrong. Besides, it was only for one night. And I didn't know you were there at the time. Did not stop you from snuggling me, Master. Shut up, Naruto responded, turning his head away. Alucard giggled at her master, before she placed her hands on his shoulders. Fret not, Master. While I shall reside in my coffin for most nights, that does not mean that I shall neglect you should you wish for me to sleep beside you. She said. Naruto did not answer, preferring to turn on the TV for late-night shows. Alucard grinned as she was able to sense the emotions her master had almost masterly hidden. She sensed her master's slight relief at her words. It appears her master wanted to close even while at night. How interesting. Despite the fact that she was a monster, her master still wanted her to remain so close to him. Even trusting her in his sleep, it seems. If things kept going the way they were, he was going to be her favorite master, if he wasn't already. He was already way up there with Integra. Good night, Master, she said, as she turned around, and prepared to move her coffin into the blocked-off area of the apartment. Good night, Alucard, she heard her master respond. She stopped for a split moment. No one had ever wished her a good night before. She grinned widely. Yup, he definitely becoming her favorite master of all time. She quickly retrieved her coffin, and traveled through the very shadows and darkness into the block-off area of the apartment. She easily broke past a weakened ceiling barrier, and her form along with her coffin materialized. She immediately grinned upon her arrival. The space was wide, and various cell doors were opened, with each cell door being rusted and the bars bent slightly. A ominous mist seemed to reside slightly, and stained blood was on the floor and walls. She could hear soft and distant echoes, seeming to resemble screaming. She grinned as she realized it was quite literally the echoes of the past. Busted chairs were littered around the area, and various torn and burned books were on the floor. To her it wasn't half bad. A bit of cleaning up would need to be done, not to mention she would have to something about those echoing voices, as they would no doubt becoming annoying. Immediately she summoned up her familiars, and instructed them to clean the place up, while another half would do something about the echoing screams. Working for the Helsing family, who specialized in vampire hunting, yet they also performed exorcisms despite not being experienced in them, she even watched them perform them. So she knew the basis of exorcising any lingering spirits. Confident that her familiars would clean and exorcise the place properly, she set her coffin in the middle of the room, opened it, and laid inside it. The coffin closing moments later. Her scarlet eyes glowed within the darkness of the coffin, and they slowly shut. She could not wait for the next day. Alucard watched with curious eyes as her master prepared for his first day at the academy. Her blonde-haired master was wearing the same type of yukata that she had given him a year ago, only it held a different design this time around. The design that the yukata held this time was that of a vast array of storm clouds all circling and centered around the back of the yukata. The color of the yukata was black with crimson trimmings, with the storm clouds all being a light blue color. They were scattered around on the front of yukata as well, but they were few in number. Speaking of her master, The now 8-year-old boy she had met over a year ago was just finishing up his breakfast at a steady pace. The boy's movements were more refined, and slightly more graceful than when she first met him. A whole year had passed by, and Alucard was pleasantly surprised at both her new life and master. Ever since the night they first met, both their lives had been the better for it. During the first few weeks with her master, she noted that he pretended to be an idiot among the villagers, and rarely ever showed intelligence to others except those he trusted. Of course Alucard had asked why her master was pretending to be an imbecile, to which the blonde responded that if the villagers heard of his true form of intelligence, then they would attack him out of the fear that the demon was becoming too strong. Alucard argued that with her protecting him he wouldn't have to worry about attacks on his person, as she would protect him to the end. It took some time, but her master was finally able to break free from his shell and reveal his true self to the other villagers. Since then, attacks on his person became more frequent and bolder. However, the villagers were never able to get within 6 feet of her master, as she had immediately used her power over the darkness to either frighten them off or nearly kill them of heart attacks. When they followed him, she would instruct her master to head into a secluded and dark area so that she may deal with them. There she would emerge and kill them quickly, but brutally as well. She had more fun when a shinobi was in the group. It meant she could play a little more. With all the attacks on his person, Naruto had quickly become quite cold for someone his age. Although he did loosen up within the presence of the Ichiraku family and the Sandaime Hokage, whenever he visited, he was still a bit distant from them. He only ever truly allowed himself to relax in Alucard's presence, and she knew her master trusted her more than anything in the world. Naruto only truly opened up with her, and that made Alucard gleeful that her master trusted her so much. Her master wouldn't be held back from such weak attachments such as friendship, or any of the like. While he could understand the sense of camaraderie, that was the only compromise she was willing to make. It would do wonders for her master to have allies, preferably powerful ones. Ones that held much influence, and such. However, attachments such as friendship, and whatnot she would not allow. She believed that such things held one back. She would ensure that her master would not hesitate with his decisions, and that he would take command immediately. Attachments such as friendship would make him soft, and that would leave a weakness for both present and future enemies. Besides, the only friend that her master needed was herself. Her master required nothing more. With his cold-like attitude towards everyone, he had gotten quite famous with children his age in the village. Most of the kids saw him as the coolest kid in the village, while some of the girls had quickly gained crushes on the blonde, much to the ire of the civilians. The blonde had even caught the attention of 2 popular girls who went by the name Ino and Sakura. Of course, most of the time the blonde completely ignored them, choosing to never interact with them. Of course that made their crushes on him to become more prominent. It both amused and annoyed Alucard. Amused her because she knew that if her master had continued the mask of idiocy they would have never paid him any mind. And she was annoyed because they were trying to gain her master's affection. She would not stand for such a thing. She would have preferred to simply kill them, but Naruto had strictly forbidden her to kill anyone unless they were out to physically harm him, or if they were an enemy. While she forbidden from killing them, her master did not say anything about scaring them. It made her feel a sadistic pleasure course there her being as she remembered the screams they gave off as she telepathically gave them nightmares. The 2 girls would immediately run to their parents' room, crying about how multiple dogs with multiple eyes were going to eat them. And of course there was the time when she would hide in their closets, and frighten them with monstrous whispers, and of course the illusion that their closets were leaking out blood. Along with a ghoul crawling out of their closet. Their shrieks of terror literally awoke the entire village. Of course, when most people heard of the reason of why they were screaming in such terror, they immediately labeled them as having nightmares. Of course it would be highly suspicious if they kept having nightmares, so Alucard made it a point to give them a nightmare once a month at random times. When her master learned of what she was doing, instead of being disappointed, or forbidding her from doing it again, he simply shrugged it off and said it's not physical damage, so it was allowed. Another reason being that before his popularity those 2 girls had seemed to forget that they instigated many fights with the blonde, and they even encouraged other kids to gang up on him. Now comes the knowledge of her master growth. Usually the librarians in the library would kick him out as soon as he entered, but with Alucard at his side he never had to worry about such a thing again. She would just either use her hypnosis on them to ensure that her master would always be allowed in her. If they insulted her master, she would put them in an illusion so terrifying that they would enter cardiac arrest. Of course she couldn't go any further than that, as her master had still forbidden her from killing them. A damn shame. Unfortunately, with the library being for mostly civilians, it did not contain any shinobi material that can be used to help her master gain strength. The only things that were of worth note were books that surprisingly held some combat styles, and a single chakra exercise known as leaf balancing. If Naruto wanted to learn more, he would have to wait until he was in the academy to gain access to the shinobi library. Of course he could only enter the section meant for the academy student. Alucard offered to sneak into the library to get him some material for him to study. Knowing that clan heirs were going to receive special preparation for the academy in the form of their parents, Naruto agreed, and ordered her to gather some basic material meant for genins. Of course he also ordered her to be extra careful. She managed to successfully enter the shinobi library, and she got her master the material he needed. Some basic D-rank jutsu, a chakra control exercise known as tree walking, and 3 C-rank jutsu. These jutsu included were the substitution, basic clones of which her master cannot do for jack shit, and transformation as the D ranks. The 3 C-ranked were fire style, grand fireball, water style, water clones, and wind style, wind palm. With the methods of how to train now achieved, Naruto, along with Alucard's help, quickly set up a training regime. At morning, at exactly 10:00, the blonde would perform warm-up sessions that usually involved sit-ups, push-ups, and 3 laps around the training field they were using at the time. That would continue until noon. From there, they would have lunch, with Naruto eating either ramen or Alucard's handmade lunches, and the vampire herself drinking his blood. After lunch, Naruto would then train on his chakra control, and practice the jutsu that Alucard borrowed. The blonde had already mastered the leaf balancing exercise, although it did take him nearly a year, and now he was working on the tree walking exercise. Surprisingly, it was coming along much better than the leaf balancing exercise. The blonde knew how to perform the jutsu Alucard had obtained quite well. While his skill with the jutsu did not match that of a chunin, the blonde could confidently say that he would perform them better than a genin. Finally, when the sun was setting, Naruto and Alucard would share a small spar in order to let the blonde gain more experience in fights. At first, Alucard was reluctant to fight against her master, as she was sure her master would be very much injured in the process. However, her master later convinced to have small spars with her with an agreement they both made. Alucard would dodge his strikes, and if he blonde managed to hit her, then she would take her turn and attack him while he dodged. It was in a sense a game of tag they created for training purpose. In terms of skill, Naruto was easily a match for a genin, but when faced against a chunin, he would lose hands down. The blonde simply wasn't at that level yet. Naruto was able to gain valuable experience with his spars with Alucard, and Alucard's habits while in a fight passed on to the blonde. Naruto would sometimes pass taunts, and he seemed to gain a sadistic side when fighting. Almost similar to hers, he also expressed great anger from someone who couldn't give him a proper fight when he expected better from them. This was started when Naruto saved a Hyuga heir from being bullied from a few kids his age. Since the children were bullying a Hyuga who was around his age, he expected them to be able to back up all their bravado, and he promptly confronted them. He insulted them by calling them weaklings, and they attacked him in anger. Moments later, the group were on the ground, groaning in pain, while Naruto was stomping on the leader's head. Anger and disappointment in his eyes as he said how pathetically weak they were. Of course he had to stop his actions as another Hyuga had interfered, calling out for the Hyuga girl he had helped. Really though, the girl must not have had a backbone. That much was obvious to him from just looking at her. While he hated people who picked on the weak, he despised people who obviously had some type of training, yet never struck back. That meant she had both a weak resolve, and a much too soft heart. Something that will get you killed in the type of world they lived in. That day Alucard was proud of her master, but she also felt like ripping that very same Hyuga girl to shreds. Ever since that incident with him saving her from those bullies, Alucard noticed the girl stalking her master at various occasions. When she informed her master of this, Naruto merely told her to ignore her as she was not doing anything harmful. However, should she try anything, then Alucard was able to do with her however she wished. She was very much pleased with her master's decision. Fortunately or unfortunately depending on who you're asking, the Hyuga girl did not do anything other than stalk her master. That disappointed Alucard a bit. That was how the rest of their year together went. Training, spending time together, or just lazing around until something interesting happened. Alucard did note one thing however, and that was that her master was very much lenient towards her, unlike her other masters. He also allowed her more freedom, but he could be stern, and very commanding with her as well. It was a bit refreshing to Alucard. Her previous masters were either cruel towards her, or barely allowed her any freedom at all. True Integra was lenient towards her, and allowed her occasional freedom from time to time, but that was barely. Another thing to note was that Alucard spent several nights with her master as well. Sometimes she would stay up with her master late at night watching TV programs, and the occasional scary movie. They would continue to do so until her master became tired, and fell asleep on her lap. To which Alucard would either carry him off to his bed, or simply allow him to remain where he was, and allow herself to sleep alongside him. That made for some pretty amusing wake-ups in the following morning. Alucard also became more defensive, and possessive of her blonde-haired master. If someone so much as even looked like they were going to glare at her master, she would immediately fight the urge to completely slaughter them. Even girls her master's age who were beginning to see her master as cute, it took everything she had to not just suddenly appear, and frighten them so much that they would enter cardiac arrest. In her eyes no one was worthy of her master. No one was worthy to set their filthy eyes upon him. No one was even worthy to lick the dirt that her master stepped on. She would completely destroy anyone who thought they were either worthy of her master, or who believed they could harm her master without consequences. Most of the time, during her master's walks through the village, it took every part of Alucard's self-restraint to not tear into the crowds of people glaring at her master. She wanted to maim, slaughter, rip out their organs, to bisect them, to hear their screams of both terror and horror as she ripped them apart piece by piece. To bathe in their blood as she slowly killed them in any prolonged and agonizing way possible. Even now she could imagine it. Her laughing cruelly, and gleeful as the people of Konoha all screamed as their limbs were torn apart, their bones making sickening cracks and snaps as they broke. Heads being crushed, and pieces of their brains scattering everywhere. Their still pumping hearts in her hands, only for her to eat it in front of their dying eyes. She imagined all that, and much, much more. In her eyes, her master rested upon a pedestal that was created by the gods themselves, a pedestal that reached and surpassed the heavens easily. In her eyes, the villagers were jealous of her master. They knew of his potential, she was sure of it, and they were jealous of it. They wanted the power that he would eventually possess for themselves. She wouldn't let them have him. He was her master. She refused to let them do what they pleased with her master. She was the only person her master needed or required in his life. He needed no more than her. Alucard was shaken from her trip down memory lane by the sound of her master getting up from his spot in the table. She watched her master pick up his plate, and he began washing the dish. That was another thing that her master was adamant about. Her master wanted to join her in her chores around the apartment complex, and such. When she asked why, her master had simply said that he couldn't allow her to undertake the entire burden of keeping the entire place tidy. Thus they quickly came to an agreement. While her familiars would keep the rest of the complex clean, Alucard would handle cooking, mopping, and dusting. Her master would handle washing the dishes, doing the laundry, sweeping, and cleaning both the bathroom and his room. It was nice to know that her master was so responsible at such a young age. Alucard, prepare to head out, Naruto said as he finished washing his dishes. Alucard grinned as she walked towards the door. I'm ready when you are, master. She responded, a small sense of anticipation welling up inside her. Moments later, Naruto stepped in the porch and quickly slipped on his shoes. He gave Alucard's small smile full of fondness. His eyes expressed warmth that was only meant for the monstrous vampire before him. Then let's go, Alucard. I'm curious as to how the academy is. The blonde said, his eyes lighting up slightly with curiosity. Alucard gave her master a smile. I am curious as well, master. I wonder if this shinobi academy shall live up to my expectations. She said in response. Then let's get going, Alucard. The sooner we get moving, the sooner our curiosity shall be sated. Naruto spoke, grinning slightly at the thought of attending the academy, and learning the things he could not yet learn. Things such as the history of the shinobi, and old legends. He could have easily had Alucard get some books about such subjects, but ultimately he decided that getting a bit of strength was more important. Now he could focus on both while he attended the academy. Alucard, sensing her master's thoughts and his excitement, grinned herself. Her form began merging with her master's shadows, and it wasn't long before she was within her master's shadow. Naruto smiled at his shadow with a fond look, and he soon turned to face the door that led to the outside of his room. Immediately his face shifted into a cold and emotionless visage, his eyes taking on an icy cold look that would freeze the flames of hell themselves. With graceful movement of a predator, the blonde opened the door, and left his apartment room, locking the door behind him as he went. He quickly exited the apartment complex, and began his trek to the academy. He coldly returned the glares that the many villagers were giving him. The villagers felt shiver run down their spines, and they either quickly looked away from the blonde, or they completely visibly shuddered and stiffly resumed what they were doing. A scarlet red eye opened from Naruto's shadow, and it glared at the villagers with pure hatred and anger. Quickly the eye disappeared, and the villagers were none the wiser. Yumi no Iruka smiled softly as he quickly organized his files on the students that he will no doubt be teaching until graduation. Truly it's been his goal to become an academy teacher, as he believed in teaching the newer generation of shinobi the things they would require in the world they live in. True that their Jonin sensei would take over the rest, but he could say with pride and great honor that he himself had a hand at preparing them. The brown-haired Chunin was excited, as this was quite honestly his first time teaching, and he hoped that he would be able to live up to his students' expectations. Iruka had brown hair that was held in a spiky ponytail, black eyes, tanned skin, and he had a horizontal scar across his nose. He wore the standard Konoha Chunin outfit. Next to him was a man with white hair, with his high-eight bandana that was tied over the top of his head. Like him, he wore the standard Konoha Chunin outfit. This was his best friend, Mizuki. You excited to teach the brats, Iruka? Mizuki asked with a wry grin on his face. Iruka smiled. Yeah, I can't wait to meet the kids. To be honest, I'm a bit nervous myself, but I believe I'm up to the task. What about you, Mizuki? He asked. Mizuki shrugged. Meh, depends really. He answered. So who do we have in our class anyway? Iruka skimmed over his files, looking at pictures and names of the students he knew he would be in his class. His eyes widened slightly. Wow, it seems our class comprises mostly of clan heirs. He said in surprise. Really? Mizuki asked in surprise. Iruka nodded. Yes, the Hyuga, Inuzuka, Aburame, Akamichi, Nara, Yamanaka, and Uchiha clans have students their heirs attending, with the rest being civilians. Well, I'll be. Mizuki mused. Looks like we have our work cut out for us, right, Iruka? He asked. After several moments of silence, however, Mizuki turned his head towards Iruka, only to see the man looking at a file in his hands with a neutral look in his eyes. Iruka, Mizuki spoke. He still did not receive a response. Scowling slightly, Mizuki elbowed Iruka in the ribs, causing the brown-haired teacher to start and look at him in surprise. What caught your attention so much that you were ignoring me for the past several seconds? Mizuki asked. Slowly, Iruka frowned. It's the next student we will be having who caught my attention. He answered. Really? Who? Mizuki asked, idly fiddling with a pencil. Uzumaki Naruto. That single word enough for the entire classroom to be engulfed in silence. Iruka continued looking at the name in front of him with a neutral expression, while beside him, Mizuki gripped his pencil tightly until it snapped. Mizuki's eyes were glaring into nothing, yet at something at the same time. The Kyuubi brat, huh? Mizuki murmured, a hint of hatred in his tone. Yeah, Iruka murmured, not noticing the tone his best friend had. He couldn't believe it. He had heard how the Uzumaki used to be a joyful and cheerful child. always playing pranks and such. However, one day it suddenly just all stopped, and the boy became cold towards everyone. And while he did soften slightly when he was with the Sadaime and the Ichiraku family, he heard that the blonde was still distant. Even towards them. To be honest, he wasn't sure how to feel about the blonde Jinchuriki. He knew enough about sealing to know that a scroll does not become a kunai when the kuniya is sealed. Yet, every time he heard the name Uzumaki Naruto, all he could remember was the visage of the fearsome Kyuubi no Kitsune. The massive fox glaring down upon the village, Ninetales destroying everything left, right, and center. The very same creature that killed his parents. He hated the fox, yet he knew that the boy the beast was sealed into wasn't the fox. Yet, he still couldn't help but be cautious. He wouldn't judge the boy, instead he would hold his judgment until he met the boy himself. He wanted to meet Naruto himself before he made his conclusions about him. Nearly an hour later, students began filling into the classroom. Various civilian children, along with clan heirs. Each one student going into the classroom with odd expressions on their faces. Each of them excited to train and become shinobi. Iruka looked upon all of them with a smile on his face as he looked at them. Truly he was honored to be able to teach them, and he really would have his work cut out for him as he noted the clan heirs within the room. He frowned slightly, however, as he caught sight of one student in the room. He was sitting in the back, ignoring all the others chatting around him. His spiky blonde hair reaching below his shoulders. A low ponytail kept it tied in place. His bangs brushing against his forehead. 2 sets of whisker marks were graced upon his cheeks. Cold blue eyes regarded the room with an icy expression, disinterest, and a lack of concern for what happened around him. A firm scowl set upon his features. It was with a start that Iruka realized that the blonde-haired child sporting the icy look in his eyes was Uzumaki Naruto. Gulping, Iruka continued staring at the blonde. The amount of coldness in the blonde's eyes both shocked and saddened him. A pang of shame and guilt welling up inside him. No child, let alone an 8-year-old, should have a look like that. The disinterest and lack of concern for the other in the room let Iruka know another thing about the blonde. If everyone in this room suddenly just died in the most gruesome and painful manner, the blonde-haired boy wouldn't even be fazed by it. At most, he would just blink and shrug it off. Suddenly, Naruto's eyes made contact with his dark brown ones, and Iruka tried not to cringe slightly. If anything, the cold look in his eyes increased, and his scowl intensified. His eyebrows furrowing as he began to glare icily at the older man. Iruka felt a shiver run down his spine, and his lips go dry. The glare the blonde was giving was enough to make even the Kyuubi itself reconsider testing the blonde. Never before had Iruka seen a child with such a cold look and attitude. Not even Uchiha Itachi was this cold. With his chakra sensing abilities, that were a bit higher than a normal sensor by a fair amount, the scarred man was able to get a feel for the boy's chakra. He had a very large amount of chakra, yet it was controlled and tame. Something Iruka was not expecting. Also, Iruka noted the warm feeling that his chakra gave off, yet that warmth to it was almost undetectable due to the indifferent and cold feeling his chakra also gave off in stronger amounts. As expected, a very large amount of chakra was centered around the boy's stomach, and it was vile and darker and sinister in nature. It was obviously the Kyuubi. However, Iruka frowned in puzzlement as he noted something else. There was another strange type of energy surrounding the blonde-haired child. It dark, far more darker, and sinister than the Kyuubi's. It felt wrong, unnatural. If the Kyuubi's chakra gave off such a vile and evil feeling, then the energy he felt around the blonde was nothing but pure evil in both nature. It felt truly like a monster as it seemed to have a kill instinct. Yet, it also seemed to protect the blonde considering how this energy was clinging tightly onto Naruto. What confused Iruka the most, however, was the dead feeling it gave off. Almost as if it was dead, yet still somehow living. The scarred Chunin was not sure how to explain it, but it felt as if it were both dead and alive at the same time. Iruka kept his eyes on the blonde, ignoring the entire class as Mizuki took it upon himself to begin roll call. Suddenly, everyone in the room seemingly vanished, leaving only Iruka and Naruto to stare into each other's eyes. Suddenly, before Iruka's very eyes, Naruto's shadow began rising, taking a humanoid shape. Soon, the visage of a girl by the age of 14 was standing behind the blonde. Her arms encircled protectively around Naruto's form. Her long raven black hair flowing down towards her waist, just below her rear. Her bangs covering her forehead, and her scarlet red eyes glaring at him with bloodthirst and murder along with a hint of insanity. Her pupils being cat-like, and seemingly rippling outwards. Her attire was an entirely white business suit with a white hat sitting on her head. Her lips were pulled back into a mocking grin so large that it threatened to split her face. Two very sharp fangs glinting as her grin grew slightly wider if that was possible. Iruka stared. It was the only thing he could do. He felt paralyzed with fear and terror. Those scarlet red eyes glaring through his very being, and then staring into his soul. Flashes of his death went through his head, each one being worse than the last. Like glass shattering, the images stopped, and Iruka held his breath. Wondering what was coming next. Subtly, Iruka stopped his chakra, then flared it. Nothing happened. Was this not a genjutsu? Suddenly, Iruka heard Naruto's voice for the first time. The blonde's voice was cold, unfeeling, detached, and most of all, merciless. Alucard. It was strange. While his voice was cold and stern, there was a hint of fondness and warmth in it. It was only one word, yet it seemed as if the girl holding the blonde knew what the blonde wanted. Without a word, the girl released the blonde from her hold, and she gave Iruka a grin that screamed of bloodlust and a desire to kill. The girl's lips parted, and she only said 3 words. "You're dog shit." With that said, Iruka watched in morbid fascination as her arm shifted into a shadow-like substance before suddenly a large black dog with the same eyes as her emerged. The black dog snarled at Iruka, before it suddenly lunged. Iruka suddenly gasped as he scooted back in his chair. His eyes wide with fear as they frantically looked around for the dog that suddenly disappeared. "Iruka," he heard a voice next to him say. Iruka blinked. He turned his head to see his friend Mizuki staring at him with concern along with the rest of the class. They were murmuring among themselves, looking at him with concern, whiles whispered about how weird he was. His eyes carefully examined the room, and finding nothing out of place, he looked back towards his friend. "I'm fine. Just continue on, Mizuki," he said, giving his friend a smile of reassurance. Giving his friend one last look, Mizuki resumed roll call. Seeing his friend go back to work, Iruka glanced upon Naruto's form. The blonde-haired child was still glaring at him. Iruka noticed the blonde shake his head slightly. Confused, Iruka decided to ignore it and organize his files. He never noticed how his own shadow lowered onto the floor, the top of it losing its sharp point. Academy students of all different classes could be seen all mingling around the academy's yard. All of them eating lunch, talking with theirs friends, playing tag, gossiping, and other various things. However, 3 students in particular did not partake in the activities. A boy who had most of his facial features hidden by a scarf his had on that covered the bottom of his face, and black sunglasses that prevented others from seeing the color of his eyes. This was Aburame Shino, the heir of the Aburame clan. The brown-haired Aburame was closely examining a bug that was resting atop his hand, ignoring the other children as he did so. Another had his hair pulled back into a spiked ponytail. He was laying on the grass, his eyes half-lidded as he gazed upon the various clouds in the sky. Next to him sat a chubby boy who had swirl marks on his cheeks, while atop his head rested a pair of underwear. Moving on. The boy was currently munching on a bag of chips with vigor, and no pause in his consumption. These 2 boys were Akamichi Choji and Nara Shikamaru, the heir of both the Akamichi and Nara clans. Resting his back against a tree, away from everyone else was Naruto. The blonde was sitting on the grass, his back leaned on the tree while he slowly ate a sandwich in his hand. His stance was both on guard and slightly relaxed. His expression was of cold neutrality, something that made other kids hesitate to approach him. However, even if other kids went to approach him, he would have ignored them anyway, for 2 main reasons. 1. He wouldn't bother wasting his time with them. And 2. He was already busy with someone. "But master, I am positive he was thinking negatively about you. I would not stand for it," Alucard once again argued. Naruto sighed lightly. "Alucard," He was not doing anything physically harmful. Your argument is invalid. But master, enough. Naruto interrupted. You almost took things a bit too far. I would have let you slide with that illusion you placed over Yumino-san. However, that whole ordeal with you going to stab him in the back was something I would not condone. We agreed that you would only kill those that would physically harm me. I allowed you to torture both Haruno-san and Yamanaka-san with nightmares simply because I trust that you wouldn't take it too far. But, you almost took it too far with your actions in the classroom. Alucard was silent for several long moments. Before she spoke, her tone subdued. Forgive me, master, I shall not let it happen again. Naruto could imagine the type of look that Alucard was sporting at the moment. Her eyes looking down, while her lips were pulled down into a small frown. Sighing slightly, Naruto allowed himself to smile slightly once he made sure no one was looking. Forgive me, Alucard. You know that I do not like taking such a stern approach with you, but should the villagers learn of you, they will try to take you away from me. I do not wish to be separated from you. Besides the Hokage and the Ichiraku family, you are my most precious person, and you always will be. It was silent for another few moments, but it was broken when Alucard spoke, her voice full of contentment. I understand, master. Just as I am your most precious person, you too hold a special place within this black heart of mine. I am your monster, just as you are my master. Truly, a monster such as me does not deserve someone such as you as my master. That and the affection that you display upon me. Naruto closed his eyes, his small smile not leaving as he leaned his head back. Alucard, in my eyes you will never be the monster you claim to be. He softly murmured aloud. He didn't hear a response, but he knew that his words pleased Alucard greatly. Feeling a hand grip his hand, he opened his eyes and looked down. He found Alucard's hand emerging from his shadow, her scarlet red eyes looking at him with love and devotion just as she always had done ever since she became his servant. Her hand reacted back in his shadow, and her eyes lingered upon his form before they closed. Naruto continued looking at where Alucard's eyes had been, before he closed his eyes and laid down on the grass. He sighed in discontent. If only he and Alucard were in a more private setting. Then he could bask in her cold, yet warm embrace as he always enjoyed. His eyes gazed upon the various children his age, all of them laughing happily, and without a care in the world. A year ago, he would have been envious of them. But now he felt nothing as he gazed upon them. The only people he cared for were the Hokage, the Ichirakus, and Alucard. Even then, it was Alucard who was pretty much a constant in his life. She had always been there for him ever since she became his servant. When his birthday came around, the Ichirakus and the Hokage did give him a few presents. But Alucard, she had made it her personal quest to ensure his 8th birthday was one of his best. She had snuck into various stores around the village, and had gotten him very expensive things for him. Things ranging from expensive artworks, to sheets and blankets, a new TV set, the newest brand might he add, a few popular movies, and picture frames for him to place pictures in. He had told Alucard that she did not have to get all those things, but she had claimed that her master more than deserved the things she had gotten him. Saying that if he wanted her to, she would have somehow gotten him a mansion in Live Inn. Naruto could only smile, and enjoy his birthday with his most precious person. He had put those pictures frames to good use as well. He had several pictures of him with the Hokage and the Ichiraku family. However, there was one picture he kept with him at all times. Digging into his pocket, he pulled out a silver locket with a gold swirl on it. Giving a small and warm smile, he opened the locket. Inside was a picture of him, smiling brightly at the camera. With her head leaning over his shoulder was Alucard. She was giving a large grin to the camera, showing off her fangs. Her scarlet red eyes seemed to glow within the lens of the camera. What are you staring at with such a smile? A voice suddenly said beside the blonde. Scowling, Naruto closed his locket, and clenched it slightly as he looked at the person who spoke to him. It was a blonde-haired girl with a clip holding her left bang to her the side, while on the right she had a small bang over her right eye. Greenish-blue eyes looked at with curiosity as she smiled sweetly down at him. Naruto's scowl increased slightly. He knew this person, how could he not? This girl had a crush on him ever since he stopped pretending to be an idiot. This girl's name was Yamanaka Ino, best friend to Haruno Sakura. And a contender to his affections. Nothing that should concern you, Yamanaka-san, Naruto murmured in a monotone. Idly, he heard Alucard growl possessively in the back of his mind. Ino pouted. Don't be like that, Naruto-kun, I was just trying to speak with you is all. She said. Naruto stared. Did this girl really think she was fooling him? He knew that she was trying to get closer to him. Something he would not cooperate with. He didn't need nor wanted to become closer to her, or anyone in general. Go away, Naruto murmured in his usual monotone, a hint of hostility in his tone. Ino, ignoring her fellow blonde, sat down next to the blonde, and smiled down at him. Completely missing the way Naruto's shadow bristled in aggravation. So, what's in the locket that has you smiling so warmly? She asked in curiosity, wanting to know what has her crush smiling in such a way. She just had to keep her usual tendencies to a minimal. Something she could do since she left Sakura to speak with a couple of other girls. Naruto continued glaring at the blonde-haired girl, making Ino nervous as she suppressed the urge to gulp. I said, go away, Naruto dangerously said, not bothering to hide his hostile tone. Ino flinched slightly, but continued pressing forward. Naruto-kun, come on. I just want to be your friend. She whined with a pout, eyes glistening as she looked at her fellow blonde. She was sure she had him now. Even her father always caved at the current look she was giving. Unfortunately for her, Naruto was not her father. Alucard, Naruto thought with narrowed eyes upon Ino's pouting form. Understood, master, Alucard responded, not hiding her glee over the matter. Naruto rose his hand, and opened his palm as if expecting something to materialize in it. Much to Ino's confusion, suddenly, from Naruto's very shadow emerged a sword. However, it was much different from any sword, and it appeared to be demonic in nature. The demonic weapon had a curved handle, and a serrated edge, a flat guard that was slight curved with a red line similar to that of a narrowed eye. The blade itself was flat, and wide. The blade being a black and gray color. The edge being spiked and curved. Daedric's sword from Skyrim. I said to go away. Naruto quietly hissed, gripping the demonic sword tightly as he glared at her. Ino gaped upon the weapon. Where had it come from? How did Naruto get it? Why did it look so damn scary? And finally, it just made Naruto seem so much cooler in her eyes. Ino was having a hard time to decide between squealing or quake in terror. Naruto, seeing Ino's indecision, growled lowly. Fangirls. He hated them. How can such a thing be considered a female? It is an insult to women everywhere. Master, can I kill this girl? This rapid beast is an even worse monster than I am. Alucard chimed within his mind, disgust evident in her tone as she growled. The blonde's shadow bristling even more. No, Naruto immediately responded. Ah, come on. It's not like anyone is going to miss her. Alucard argued. 1. She is the daughter of Yamanaka Inoichi, the head of the Yamanaka clan, and a member of the torture and interrogation department. 2. She has yet to do any type of physical harm. Naruto explained. Alucard merely grumbled, mentally shaking his head slightly. Naruto increased the intensity of his glare upon Ino's form, and he allowed his demonic weapon to graze against the grass, the blade cutting the grass effortlessly. Yamanaka-san, I told you to go away. If you refuse to listen to me this time, I'm afraid you won't like the results. Naruto stated with narrowed eyes. Ino gulped, and she laughed nervously, just now realizing that she was probably annoying her fellow blonde more than she intended. But it was okay, she was sure Naruto would forgive her. After all, true love proceeds all. Ino opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted when the bell rung, signaling that it was time to return to their classes. Something Naruto was thankful for. The blonde allowed his demonic weapon to melt within the shadows, and quickly left Ino, who was attempting to catch up to the boy moments later. Unfortunately for her, she was unable to match the brisk and quick pace that Naruto held. She later lost sight of him when they entered the building. Ino sighed, then pouted. She almost had him, she was sure of it. She just had to try a bit harder next time. But first she had to get to class. It wouldn't do for a clan heir to be late after all. Ichiraku Ayame hummed as she tapped the notebook within her hand. She was humming a cheerful tune, one that had a few people nearby listening as the sound brushed past their ears. Her humming stopped as she heard someone enter the small ramen stand. Straightening up, she took a small breath, and gave a beaming smile to the customer that entered. "Hello, welcome to Ichiraku Ramen. How may I help you?" she asked, eyes closed with her beaming smile. It was silent for a few moments, before a monotone voice spoke. One she was all too familiar with. "I'll have my usual Ayame-san." Opening her eyes, her smile got larger as she saw the visage of her surrogate little brother. "Naruto, how was your first day in the academy?" she asked softly, warm dark eyes regarding him with a fond expression. If Alucard could be seen, you would have seen her giving Ayame a dark scowl. "Fine," he curtly replied in a chipped tone. Ayame felt a pang of sadness stab in her heart at the blonde's distant attitude. "I see," she said with a sad smile. "My order?" Naruto asked. The brown-haired girl nodded. "Yes, of course." She entered the back of the stand, and moments later she returned with an empty glass cup. "I still don't understand why you always want an empty glass cup," she said as she sat down. Not expecting an answer, she went back into the stand, and set about preparing the blonde, usual order. Naruto glanced at her. Before he glanced around, making sure no one could see, he pulled out a kunai and sucking in a breath, the blonde stabbed the kunai into his left hand. Wincing softly, he held his hand over the glass, and allowed his blood to pool into the glass. He squeezed his bleeding hand, making more blood drip in the glass. Moments later, the glass was filled, and the blonde watched for a moment as his wound healed. Wiping his hand of blood, the blonde picked up the glass, and held it down at seat level. A second later, a white-gloved hand came out of his shadow, took the glass cup from his hand, and sank back down. "Delicious, and magnificent as always, master," Alucard chimed, bliss evident in her tone. "I'm glad for the compliment, Alucard. So tell me, what did you think of the academy?" The blonde asked, idly tapping his fingers as Ayame placed a bowl of ramen in front of him. The brown-haired girl narrowed her eyes at seeing the missing glass cup, but Naruto ignored it as he murmured a small thank you. "I am a little disappointed with it, master. It is a place to teach children how to become shinobi. I expected the learning material to be about killing, espionage, interrogation, survival, and other essentials that you would require on the battlefield. Instead all you were learning was basic math, history of the village, and other mundane things that you could do in your spare time. Not to mention you already know all those things, master. In summary, I believe it was a waste of time. If it were not mandatory to graduate from the academy to become a shinobi, I would have told you to not go to school at all." Alucard answered. "I agree with your observation. We are supposed to be taught how to become. We are instead taught things that we could just easily read a book to learn about. It's not that difficult to read and learn," Naruto said. "I suggest only attending the academy when it suits you, master. Perhaps when tests, and other things of importance. That way you can keep your grades up even while barely attending the academy. In my opinion, the academy will do more harm than good towards you, master," Alucard claimed. "How so?" "Say you do attend the academy every day. Not only would you have to switch your training regime to accommodate for the academy, your time for training would gradually lessen until finally, you are spending too much time with the academy, and not enough time training as per usual." As a result, Alucard trailed off. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he paused in eating his ramen. "I would lose a good portion of the strength I already have, thus unintentionally weakening myself in the process," he finished. "Preciously, master. The academy is a waste of time. You are much better off on your own, master." Naruto fought the urge to smile in a public setting. "Once again your insight has proven to be invaluable, Alucard." If Alucard could be seen, you would have saw the large grin she had on her face. "I am pleased to be of service, master." Naruto looked towards Ayame, who was currently tapping her notebook as she stared off into space. Her eyes unfocused as she looked at him. He idly wondered what she was thinking, before he dismissed the thought. He returned to his meal, hoping to be finished soon so that he may go home. However, he froze when he heard someone sit next him. He glanced towards his right, and instantly he coldly glared at the person sitting next to him. Hey, Iruka said nervously, a bead of sweat on the back of his neck at Naruto's cold look. Also, why did he get the feeling of impending death? Unseen to Iruka, Naruto's shadow twitched. Ayame, who had finished staring at the blonde, looked at her possible new customer and smiled politely. May I take your order? I'll have pork ramen please. Urka answered, his tone polite. Unnoticed by Iruka and Ayame, a glass cup gripped tightly by a white-gloved hand was set upon the counter, before the hand darted back into the shadows. Ayame turned to enter the shop, but paused for but a moment as she stared at the empty glass. That glass suddenly just appeared again, she thought, before she entered the back. Iruka gave the glass a confused look, idly wondering where it came from. He looked at his student sitting across from him, and he gulped as the blonde's glare never left him as he slowly finished his meal. The teacher cleared his throat slightly. About earlier today Naruto-san. Naruto interrupted. Iruka blinked. Excuse me. He asked. You shall refer to me as San, or you shall address me by my surname. Am I clear? Naruto stated frostily, his eyes like glaciers as he glared at the Chunin. No one was allowed to refer to him with such an affection suffix. Ayame didn't use the kun suffix because she knew he didn't like it. The Sandaime referred to him with the kun suffix all the time. Naruto stopped trying to correct the old man after the 500th time he asked him to stop it. As for Ino, she was a fangirl, enough said. There was only one person who Naruto would ever allow to use such a suffix with him, and that person only referred to him as master. I do not use such an affectionate suffix because it would be disrespectful of me, master. Alucard said. Naruto mentally blinked. He should learn how to keep his surface thoughts private. I would happily teach you how, master. Alucard chimed. Right, Naruto-san, Iruka awkwardly said, unknowingly bringing Naruto back into reality, much to Alucard's well-hidden annoyance. Anyway, he began, I was wondering. That genjutsu you used on me earlier today, why couldn't I dispel it? He asked. Naruto snorted, a hint of condensation being heard as he spoke. Do you truly believe I would explain myself to you? I saw the way you looked at me back in class. If there is one thing I despise in this world, it's the look you gave me in class. The same look nearly everyone in this dam gives me. Naruto sneered, a flash of the villagers glaring at him coming to mind. I put you in that genjutsu simply because I wanted those disgusting eyes of yours averted. He coldly said, making Iruka flinch in guilt and shame. I won't explain the genjutsu to you. Figure it out for yourself. With that said, the blonde returned to his ramen intent on finishing it. Mentally, the blonde was trying to calm himself, trying to quell the anger that was still raging within him. Soon he felt Alucard's dark, but warm presence fill his mind. Her silent whispers calming him as he allowed himself drown within her voice. The anger he felt brimming within him faded as Alucard quelled it as she had always done whenever he was angry or enraged. While she always seemed to encourage his anger, she had always calmed him moments later after one of his anger spouts. He allowed himself to bask slightly in her mental embrace. Others would have found Alucard to be a creature of pure evil, and something that must be cleansed. But Naruto, he didn't mind her darkness. In fact, he loved her dark presence. If going into the light meant leaving her behind, then Naruto would prefer to remain with the darkness with his monstrous vampire. Iruka gave the blonde a strange look, idly wondering why he had his eyes shut. The anger he was able to sense in the blonde was gradually disappearing as if it were never there to begin with. Something that confused Iruka. He continued to watch the blonde silently, watching as the blonde ate his food quietly and quickly. He heard Ayame place a bowl of ramen in front of him, and he murmured a small thank you. He slowly dug in, silently savoring the taste, before going in for another one. He heard a small thud, and he glanced to see Naruto had placed some money on the counter. The blonde gave Ayame a small nod, before he left the stand. Ayame watching his form sadly as he did so. It makes me sad seeing him like this, she said suddenly, glancing at Iruka from the corner of her eye. Me and him used to be very close, you know. He was so happy and cheerful back then, but now he's so distant. Whatever the villagers say about him, they're wrong. As teacher, It should be your job to know your student before judging them. With that said, the brown-haired girl went into the back. Iruka frowned slightly, and he stared at his reflection in the ramen bowl. He thought back to what he had witnessed of the blonde throughout the day. Naruto was cold to everyone, and he never once tried to interact with anyone his own age. In fact, or the boy didn't have such a cold attitude and expression, then he might have seemed lonely. Iruka felt a pang of both sympathy and guilt for the blonde-haired boy. Guilt for judging him too quickly, and sympathy for he too knew what it was like to feel lonely. Iruka sighed. He would make it up to the boy somehow. He would show him that there are others who are willing to see him for him. With that thought, Iruka dug into his food, determined to get to know the boy the next day. "So what movie are we watching tonight, master?" Alucard idly asked as she lounged on the couch. Several hours had passed since they returned to the apartment, although they did have a quick tag spar, of which resulted in Alucard's win for the day. Naruto hummed as he looked at the list of movies that before him. There was at least a dozen of them before him, but he was having a rather difficult time finding one to watch. Finally one caught his attention. "Hey, Alucard, what do you think of watching this one?" the blonde asked, tossing the film. Alucard caught and looked at the name of said film. "Oh, a horror film featuring a vampire?" she asked in amusement. "Why not? I'm curious as to what the humans of this place think of vampires in the first place. Considering they never met a true one like me before," she stated, a small grin on her face. She always did find it amusing at how often the human imagination of vampires always ran rampant. Naruto shrugged, and he plopped the film in. Moments after it started playing, Naruto quickly took his favorite spot in Alucard's lap. The no-life queen's arms encircling around him automatically, and her head resting atop the spiky mess he called hair. The movie was quite dull in Alucard's opinion. At times she felt insulted with the way the people of this world described vampires as. What type of vampire screamed like a little girl when garlic so much as scarped them? What type of vampire fucking sparkles in the sunlight? By the end of the movie Alucard's eye was twitching rapidly as she glared at the TV. She took a deep breath, and successfully managed to calm the anger that was welling up within her. She made a mental to find the person who made the movie, and to give them a very painful demise. A very slow and agonizing one. She turned her scarlet-red eyes towards her master, whom was still on her lap, and she smiled genuinely as she looked upon his sleeping form. She carefully picked up her master, and brought him towards his bedroom. Carefully, she lowered him onto the bed. Next she grabbed a blanket, and lowered down on her master's form, leaving only his head exposed. "Good night, master," she said lovingly. A scowl quickly overtook her features as she sensed three life forces sneak into the apartment complex. And they heading up in this floor's direction. With bloodthirsty growl, the no-life queen entered the shadows, and traveled through them. It took only a second to reach where the three other people were, and she decided to remain hidden in the shadows, wanting to toy with the three soon-to-be dead humans. "Kenji, should we really be doing this?" one of them murmured. "Shut it, Takeshi, you want to put the demon in his place, right?" The one whom Alucard assumed was Kenji responded. "Both of you shut up, I just want to teach the demon to not take us so lightly. The way he was walking around the village like he was equal to us. It pisses me off," the third one fiercely said. A dangerous scowl came upon Alucard's features, before her smirk returned. It was time to play. Instantly, the hallway in which the villagers were walking through was engulfed in darkness, so much so that they could barely see a thing except for themselves. What's going on?" Kenji asked in fear. The man never received an answer, unless you count hundreds of eyes suddenly opening within the darkness and answer. What? Takeshi murmured as he stared at the hundreds of staring at him, and his friends. "Kenji, Jin, please tell me you're seeing this." Kenji, along with Jin, nodded as they backed up, and looked around in fear. The eyes not once leaving their forms. Soon, a sinister feminine chuckle caught their attention, and they watched as Alucard emerged from the darkness, her lower body still connecting with the darkness around them. Her scarlet-red eyes shined maliciously, and she gave the three men a fanged grin. Well, she began, "What's this? Three little lost dogs who wandered into a kennel to be put down." Her grin grew larger, further frightening the three before her. You three have two options on how you wish to die. Option 1. Slow and painful, and Option 2. Very slow, and very agonizing. So tell me, dogs, which is it? She asked menacingly, taking mocking and slow steps. The three tried to turn and run, their eyes wide in fright. However, a moment later they fell to the ground screaming in pain. They cradled their stumps where their feet used to be. Looking back, they saw in horror 3 large black dogs with multiple eyes devouring their missing feet. One of the menacing canines finished earlier, and began to savagely fight the other next to it for the feet that it was currently trying to devour. Alucard merely walked past the 3 dogs, idly patting one on the head as she did so. The dogs ignored her as she walked by. The 3 villagers tried crawling away from the frightening girl, their instincts of survival kicking in as they screamed, and crawled away. Jin was the first one to die as Alucard stomped on his back. Jin screamed in terror, tears of despair trailing down his cheeks before Alucard mercilessly impaled her hand through the man's back. Her hand emerged through man's body, bones shattering and breaking as her hand went through his chest before it emerged out the other side. She removed her hand from his chest, leaving a hand-sized hole in its place. In her heart she held a slowly beating object. She turned to the final 2 men, who were watching in horror as they saw that she was holding the still beating heart of their friend. With maddening laugh, Alucard squeezed, and the beating heart was destroyed, blood splattering on her face. The final 2 men screamed in horror and fear as Alucard began walking towards them. The 2 whimpered as she stopped, and began licking the blood off her hands and face. Moments later, she began walking towards them again, and the 2 men felt tears streaking down their cheeks as she got closer and closer to them. The 2 sobbed as she stopped a foot away from them. The 2 sobbed louder as from beneath her, centipedes began emerging from her feet. The 2 screamed as the centipedes began crawling all over them, some tearing into their skin and entering their bodies. The centipedes inside their skins began to move around, making the experience more painful for them, and they were also began to tear into the men's bones, making the men scream louder in pain. The centipedes outside their bodies were merely shredding their skin and muscles. Small, but numerous chunks of flesh being eaten off of them. All while Alucard watched on with a sickening grin on her face. What are you? Kenji yelled in agonizing pain, while Takeshi was screaming beside him. Alucard's grin grew as she stared at the dying man in glee, a real fucking vampire. Was her response. More centipedes swarmed the 2 men, and moments later the centipedes scattered, leaving only blood stains on the floor. Alucard's hellhounds soon began licking the blood off the floor, while Alucard herself began walking down the hall. She stopped at a window, and her scarlet eyes looked upon the village of Konoha. She glared down up the village with distaste and disgust. She gave off a low growl, before she resumed strolling down the hall. It didn't take her long to reach the newly made door that led towards her lair. She entered, and walked down another series of halls. Gradually the halls began to become more decayed and darker. She found herself in front of a large double-pair door. She opened them, and entered the large room that served as her lair. The cells still empty and rusted. A small amount of mist remaining within the room. The screams of the past being rendered silent due to her exorcisms. In the middle was her midnight black coffin. She walked towards her coffin and opened it with her telekinesis. She entered her coffin, and allowed her eyes to shut as her coffin closed. With that, she slept, idling wondering what the future would bring for both her and her precious master. Inuzuka Kiba growled in frustration as he was once again thrown harshly against the ground. Dust kicking up as dirt settled itself upon his frustrated form. He grit his teeth as he heard the jeers and taunts of his classmates as they told him to give up his match. But he couldn't, as this was both about his pride, and this was one of the tests he had to at least perform well in if he wanted to pass the academy, seeing as it was the day of graduation. His partner Akamaru was laying beside him, the pup whimpering as bruises littered the dog's small body. Akamaru, get up, we can win this, Kiba said fiercely, determination in his eyes as she stood unsteadily to his feet. A moment later he was thrown off his feet, and landing harshly on the ground again. Kiba panted heavily, his vision blurring as a trail of red liquid rolled down his head. He glared angrily at his opponent. only for cold sapphire blue eyes to glare back into his eyes. His opponent had golden blonde hair that reached past his shoulders, his ponytail that he once had being gone in favor of letting his hair flow free. 2 bangs framed his face, along with a few bangs swaying into both his eyes, blocking just a small portion of them. Whisker marks being etched upon his cheeks, a deep scowl on his face as he regarded the Inuzuka with cold neutrality. The blonde was not wearing the usual yukata clothing that he was seen in so frequently, instead opting to wear a strange set of black robes. The robes consisted of a light blackish-gray long-sleeved hooded shirt with a sleeveless orange leather wrapping, trousers, leather calf braces, leather wrap arm bracers, a black sleeveless surcoat, and leather footwear. Jedi adventure robes from Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, with the exception of the robes being black, along with orange attributes. The blonde himself did not have any injuries, or even a speck of dirt on him. It reminded Kiba that not once was he able to lay a single hand on the blonde. "Is that all, Inuzuka? I expecting better from a clan heir," Naruto coldly stated, his statement being heard clearly despite the cheering roars of the blonde's fangirls. Kiba clenched his fist as he heard the subtle disappointment in the blonde's voice. His teeth clenching as he tired fruitlessly to try to think of a way he could turn this around. He heard Naruto scoff, and shake his head. "I suppose this is the best the Inuzuka clan can offer. How disappointing. I was expecting more of a fight." The blonde began. "How a weakling such as you believes he can become a notable shinobi is laughable. At best, you won't even survive your first B-ranked mission as you are now. How pathetic you are. Perhaps a cat can give me a better fight," Naruto coldly finished, the taunt being heard throughout the entire training grounds despite the loud cheering. Kiba felt his anger increase as he stood, giving the blonde an expression of rage as his fists clenched. Seeing this, Naruto gave a small sadistic smirk. "Well now, it seems like you have a bit of bite left to your bark. I'll be sure to rectify that," he stated, a hint of approval in his eyes before it vanished. Kiba growled, before he charged at the blonde, Naruto merely standing in the same spot regarding him with boredom. Once close enough, Kiba began attacking the blonde with a flurry of swipes. However, the blonde dodged all of them, hardly ever giving the Inuzuka even the chance to hit him. Off to the side, overseeing the match was Iruka and Mizuki. Iruka was watching the fight with slight worry, but otherwise he was putting down the results. While Mizuki was glaring at Naruto, his eyes drilling a hole into the blonde's head. Iruka tapped his pencil on the desk once, idly putting down another mark as Kiba was yet again thrown to the ground by one of Naruto's kick. Iruka winced in sympathy, idly rubbing his leg as he remembered how strong Naruto's kicks were when he sparred with him a few minutes ago. He once again looked at the two of his soon-to-be former students. Kiba had already scored enough points to pass, while Naruto himself had gotten perfect marks, just as he had on the written portion of the exams. He sighed briefly. The sparring part of the second course of the exams was set into 2 portions. 1. The student would spar with the teacher, and if they impressed the examiners enough, or if they scored enough points, then they would pass. The second part of the second exam was to set them against their peers. While they had already gauged their skill levels by sparring with them personally, the second part was meant to see if they were willing to truly fight against someone they knew, and if so they wanted to know to what extent they would go. This was meant to prepare them if one of them went rouge, that way they would have an easier time in combating them as they had in a sense already hardened themselves for a confrontation against former comrades. Based on what he was seeing at the moment, Kiba was willing to fight, but at the same time just a bit hesitate. While Naruto himself was perfectly willing to break a few bones as throughout the entire fight, Naruto had only attacked Kiba in vitals areas. But he could tell the blonde was holding back so he didn't permanently damage the Inuzuka. Thinking about Naruto made Iruka released a small sigh as he once again sent the blonde a mildly worried look. Over the last few years, Iruka had tried to get to know the blonde, trying to find any type of common ground that they could base a friendship on. Unfortunately, all his efforts were unsuccessful. The blonde either ignored him completely, or glared at him until he went away. That and the blonde barely ever went to class. Most of the time he never attended the academy, or he would just skip all his classes, making it difficult to speak with the blonde. Iruka had to resort to speaking with Naruto at the ramen stand as that was the only place he would ever find the blonde. He had tried to go to Naruto's apartment, but he couldn't as he always had the feeling of impending death every time he got near it. The blonde himself had yet to gain any type of friends either, and while he may have been seen occasionally speaking with Aburame Shino, Shino had confirmed that they were not friends, but instead acquiesces. Naruto was also seen exchanging a small nod of respect with Uchiha Sasuke, the last of the Uchiha clan, and runner-up for Rookie of the Year, with the title itself belonging to Naruto. Iruka had managed to gain some type of common ground with Naruto, but the blonde still remained distant towards him. He no longer gave Iruka any glaring looks, instead them being of cold neutrality. He did speak with Iruka, but those exchanges were little and quick, with the blonde always ending the exchange only moments after speaking with him for but a few moments. While he was dismayed at having very little progress with the blonde, the progress he made was progress nonetheless, and Iruka was happy to have made progress at all. Iruka was shaken from his thoughts as he heard Kiba yell out in pain. Quickly looking forward, Iruka was met with the sight with Kiba kneeling in front Naruto, the Inuzuka's fist being held in Naruto's hand. The blonde was gripping the Inuzuka's hand tightly, and was twisting it, making Kiba yell out in pain, and forcing the Inuzuka on his knees. The Inuzuka's nose was also bleeding, and Iruka was worried that his nose was possibly broken. Quickly, Iruka shot from his seat, and rose his hand. Match over. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto, he shouted. Immediately after that, Naruto released Kiba from his grip, the Inuzuka falling to the ground, and cradling his hand, and blood from his nose dripping to the ground as Akamaru slowly trudged towards his partner. If anyone paid attention, they would have noted that the blood that was dripping to the ground near Naruto's shadow, the droplets would immediately disappear as the shadows seemed to absorb them. Naruto merely gave Iruka a blank look, making Iruka gulp just slightly. Finally, after a moment Naruto gave Iruka a brief nod before he walked back to his favorite spot near the edge of the training ground, where a tree stood. The blonde quickly jumped on one of the many branches, and sat down, his legs hanging off the sides, as he leaned against the tree's bark. Naruto's impassive eyes gazed upon the training ground as Kiba was led out, the few medical shinobi around giving the Inuzuka whatever medical attention they could. He gazed upon his classmates, he made contact with Sasuke's onyx black eyes, and he found himself giving the Uchiha a small nod, with the Uchiha returning it. He briefly shut his eyes, and turned his head away from the field. Alucard, have you been able to make contact with the Kyuubi yet? Naruto asked. It was silent for a moment before Alucard's voice sounded through his mind. Unfortunately no master, the beast is still not responding to my calls. I still do not understand why you do not let me purge him from your body. She answered, a small scowl adorning her features. I wish to speak with Kyuubi-san a bit more than we did last time before coming to my own conclusions about him. That, and I wish to know just why the Yondaime chose me to hold him. Right now, only the Sandaime knows of why, and the Kyuubi himself may know why as well. Of course master. While on the subject of the Kyuubi, Naruto still found it difficult to believe that such a creature resided within him. That, and it was also the day of when he learned of Alucard's ability to view the memories of other living beings by drinking their blood. Of course, he had asked Alucard why she was keeping such a thing from him, as he could have used that particular ability to learn many more things considering all the knowledge that Alucard had stored within her, not to mention the few jonin she devoured. As it turned out, Alucard had several reasons as to why she didn't reveal to him of her memory absorption ability. The first being that she wanted him to find out on his own accord as her previous masters had done before. While she would do anything to help him, she wanted him to be able to discover facts of his enemies and allies of his own accord to help him grow. Learning of her memory absorption was something of a test. She had also occasionally dropped hints for him to figure out, and as expected of him, he found those hints she always left behind. She used the same method she used on her previous masters. Whenever they had a mission for her, she would always return, leaving behind small and subtle hints of her memory absorption power. Hints such as knowing where they placed their secret vaults, other valuables, or just doing things that she knew she was never able to do before. With Naruto however, she had to do it differently, as the blonde never kept secrets from her. As such, she had to do something else to drop the hints for him. Those hints she used while sparring with Naruto during their training. Occasionally, she would suddenly switch to a fighting style that she was sure that made Naruto confused, as he had seen those styles before. From there she would start to use tactics from the people she devoured. It took Naruto a while, and no small amount of observation, but he was finally able to put the pieces together. He had his suspicions, as he did in fact note the random different styles that Alucard employed. His suspicions were later confirmed, as he noted that Alucard knew the lock combination to a safe that was kept in the back of one of the stores that usually kicked him out. The owner of the store was just about to violently kick him out, but Alucard had quickly intervened, and devoured the man before he could do such a thing. Naruto was glad that it was night that time of day, and as such most of the villagers were asleep. From there, he watched as Alucard just turned around, opened a secret compartment behind a painting, and unlocked the safe with hardly any difficulty. That was when it clicked for the blonde. Later, back in their apartment, Naruto had asked if she truly had a memory absorption power, to which Alucard grinned and confirmed. The second reason why she didn't tell him of her ability was that she did not enjoy using that power when she drank the blood of a villager within the village. When asked why, Alucard had explained that while she could block out the memories in the blood if she so chose, if she wanted to delve deeper with the memories to learn more, she would have to first go through all the more recent memories, as those memories would be the most powerful of the among the rest. She also explained that some of the more recent memories were of them plotting to make his life miserable, or hurting him in general. She had explained that while hardly anything bothered her, as she was the very definition of the word monster, she did not enjoy viewing the memories of her master being hurt, as that would send her into a type of blind rage. Not to mention when she heard of the plans they usually made to harm him would send her into an even more rage-induced state. She had even caught a glimpse of how a man was very much planning on raping her master back then. Since that time, she had been blocking out the memories of each of the villagers she consumed, hardly ever giving them any type of thought. Naruto had no response to that, but he still could not overlook how useful her memory absorption power was. Eventually, Naruto asked if it were possible for Alucard to connect her mind with his, to make it possible that he could control the memory influx. Something that made Alucard curious, as she had never tried with her previous masters. The two quickly tested it to see if it were truly possible. The results were interesting, as they had immediately ended up in the middle of Konoha, yet there was not even a single trace of any living being. They had also noted the strange sight of nearly no one walking the streets of Konoha, not even a single trace of life could be spotted. They had noted that there were people, yes, but they did nothing, just standing in the same spots with blank faces. They had left for Hokage Mountain to gain a better view, and to think on the strange happening, although Alucard had a few minor suspicions. When they got to the stairs that led up the mountain, they noted a steel door off to the side that no doubt led inside the mountain, and their curiosity won out, and they investigated. Naruto would never forget the first meeting he had with the Kyuubi itself. He was very much glad that Alucard was with him that day. "What is this place?" Naruto asked, his eyes cautiously looking around the dark area, his eyes not being able to see even a single feet in front of him. Beside him, Alucard looked around curiously, her eyes having already adjusted to the darkness around her. "We know we are inside the mountain, but where in the mountain is the point?" "Be careful, master, there is a hole in front of you," Alucard pointed out, grabbing her master by the hand to prevent him from moving forward. Naruto nodded in thanks. "Thank you, Alucard. Perhaps it is better for you to hold on to me, master," Alucard stated. Naruto agreed, and with that the blonde found himself letting Alucard take the lead, holding her hand as she did so. The duo continued walking through the pitch-black darkness for what seemed to be hours, before finally lighting was gradually being returned, and Naruto's vision was restored as they reached a large room with a fair amount of lighting. A positively massive cage stood before them, the bars being a bronze color, chains protruding from the walls, and crossing against the bars. Sharing a glance with his monstrous servant, Naruto moved forward, Alucard beside him. As they got closer to the cage, they felt as if they were being watched, Alucard looking around them with narrowed eyes as the blonde's eyes quickly turned cold. When they were but a foot away from the cage, Alucard suddenly sprang forward in front of Naruto, her arms spread out in a protective stance as a claw, that suddenly forward from the cage, stopped but a mere inch from her eye. Naruto's cold look increased, while Alucard merely grinned widely, her eyes shining with bloodlust. Before their very eyes, a pair of crimson-red eyes opened, and glared down at them with hate and loathing. If only you were an inch closer, then my claw would have pierced that skull of yours. Although I highly doubt that would kill you, wouldn't it, vampire? A deep, growling, and menacing voice spoke. I'll be sure to step closer next time, that way I can teach you why you shouldn't make such violent movements towards my master. Alucard stated, still grinning, her scarlet eyes glaring murder at the massive creature. Behind her, Naruto was giving the massive creature a glare, his ice-cold eyes staring daggers into the crimson orbs hovering above them. You sound confident, bloodsucker, but even with all your power you wouldn't be able to defeat me. I am a being who could destroy mountains, and cause natural chaos with but a swipe of my tails. The voice once again growled out, although a dark twinge of amusement could be heard. I don't know about that, I am pretty powerful myself. Granted, I don't have the raw power needed to destroy a mountain, but still, I have a habit of not dying. I wonder how you will deal with that. Alucard shot back, her fangs glinting. We'll see about that habit of yours after I blast a Biju Dama in your goddamned face. Naruto's eyes adjusted a bit more to the dark, and he could see the nearly hidden visage of the massive creature before him, and Alucard. The crimson-red slitted eyes that expressed raw anger, and a hint of hatred. Dark orange fur, rabbit-like ears that stuck out, a human-like torso, and finally 9 tails lazily flowing behind it. Naruto only had one thing to say about the creature before him. Kyuubi, I had suspected that you were never killed. The blonde murmured, catching the fox's attention as it shifted eyes from Alucard to Naruto. Alucard made sure to stand more protectively in front of the blonde, seeing the fox focus on her master. Oh, you suspected that I still lived? Tell me, why would you think that? The Biju asked, a hint of curiosity seeping into his tone. The books in the academy that speak of the Biju. They always said that a Biju was unkillable, that they could not die. Yet we were also told that the Yondaime Hokage killed a Biju. I knew that one of them was entirely incorrect, so I always had a suspicion that you were still alive. Naruto explained, making the Kyuubi raise an eyebrow in interest, and Alucard grin at her master's observations. But to think that you were sealed inside Hokage Mountain. I did not expect that. Kyuubi grinned, amusement seeming to dance around in the Biju's eyes. This is not Hokage Mountain. Well, it is. It's just not in the real world, he cryptically said. Naruto narrowed his eyes, his mind trying to solve Kyuubi's cryptic words. While Alucard was able to realize what the Kyuubi was implying. She sent her master a small glance, wondering what his response would be. Either way, she would stand by her master to the end. Naruto continued to put the pieces together one by one. The glares of the other villagers. Their murmured curse of the demon brat. How he and Alucard first found themselves in this place to begin with. The question that Naruto had wondered for the first 7 years of his life had finally been answered. Right when he did not care about the answer anymore. You are sealed within me, Naruto murmured slowly, the small light in his sapphire blue orbs dimming, a perfectly blank expression on his face. Kyuubi watched the blonde with interest. He could use this to his advantage. Yes, I am. The pathetic humans of this village believe you to be me. All their abuse, their anger, their grief, their hatred. They took it all out on you to get to me. A waste of time if you ask me, since I was not affected by what they were doing at all. The 9-tailed beast stated, dark amusement in his rumbling voice. Do you want revenge? Remove this seal, and I'll grant you the power you will need to obtain your revenge. Naruto remained where he was, raw rage and anger burning within his eyes as his teeth clenched together. His took a single step forward. Alucard's hand came upon his shoulder as her scarlet eyes stared into his recently turned crimson. Master, do not let this beast's words control your actions through your anger. Remember that no matter what you do, no matter what others may think of you, no matter who calls you a monster, remember that I will always remain by your side. I said that I would be the embodiment of your rage, hatred and anger. And I still am, master. If it is your hatred and rage you must release, then I shall vent it for you. A beautiful creature such as yourself does not need to be influenced by this loathsome beast. Allow me to be your instrument of hatred. Allow me to place this beast in its place. Naruto stared into Alucard's eyes, his crimson eyes gradually fading back to blue as he stared into her scarlet orbs. Her expression soft and loving, her presence dark but comforting. He saw a hint of approval in her eyes as his anger dimmed, but was still burning just beneath the surface. Alucard, I had no intention of listening to Kyuubi. I was merely going to slap his claw away from you. Thank you though, Alucard. Your words have calmed my anger down. Naruto calmly stated, his voice level and calm. His eyes glaring icebergs into the Kyuubi's crimson eyes. The Kyuubi snarled, his eyes glaring at the two as they faced him in unison. That damned vampire, and that impudent brat, he was going to rip both to shreds when he got out this godforsaken seal. Now then, Kyuubi-san, why are we here? Naruto coldly asked. Kyuubi growled softly, his crimson eyes staring daggers at both the blonde and raven-haired vampire. Obviously, I brought the two of you here. He huffed. Why? Alucard asked in curiosity, wondering what such a beast would want with her precious master. I couldn't help but overhear of your little memory absorption problem. So being the generous and kind being that I am, I decided to lend you my aid in solving this problem of yours. Naruto rose an eyebrow as he mulled over this interesting turn of events. He could accept the Kyuubi's help, and use the full extent of Alucard's memory absorption to its fullest. However, what would you like in exchange? The blonde asked warily as Alucard sneered at the Kyuubi with a twisted grin. If the beast asked for her master to remove the seal, then she would happily put the beast in its place for daring to ask her master of such a thing. The Kyuubi gave off a deep rumbling chuckle, one that had Alucard sneering at with a growl. How dare such a beast laugh at her master? Her fingers twitched as she resisted the urge to start a fight with the beast. Unless her master gave her the order, she would remain docile. If I hadn't observed you for as long as I have, I would have demanded my release from this accursed seal as compensation. But I know you are made of sterner stuff, and I know that you wouldn't release this seal even if your life depended on it. So instead, I'll ask for something different. I am well aware of the vast land that is outside of this mountain. I want to be able to both see and feel it. Find a way to get me, or this damn cage outside this mountain. And I'll help you with your problem. Naruto narrowed his eyes, warily eyeing the Biju as he tried to think of a reason to refute the Biju's help. Don't get him wrong, he knew that he would need the Biju's help at one point. He just didn't expect it to be this soon. Nor did he expect the Kyuubi to be the first to instigate this meeting of theirs. What will it be, boy? My patience wears thin, Kyuubi growled. Alucard sneered. My master shall answer when he wishes to, not when you demand, beast. Kyuubi snarled. It seems that the boy needs to learn to put a tighter leash on his pet. Alucard smirked. At least master allows me freedom. Unlike you, she said in a smug tone, her smirk stretching widely as the Kyuubi's claws suddenly shot out. Thankfully the claws were held back by the bars, and they only reached an inch away from Alucard's eyes. The no-life queen gave a malicious grin as the shadows began writhing, her eyes glowing an eerie red as the seals on her hands glowed. The girl was giggling menacingly as she slowly brought her hands together with a rectangular shape forming in the middle. It is obvious that hardly anything will faze you, Kyuubi-san. However, how will you handle this? She asked menacingly. She glanced behind her, Scarlet staring into impassive Sapphire. Master, I am your weapon and shield. I may slay millions in your name, be they innocent or guilty. However, it is you who must give the order. Please, allow me to show this loathsome creature the proper respect he should bestow upon you. Allow me to show this beast that he should not demand any deals with you. That instead he should bow beneath your heel. That he should be grateful for even having the honor of being sealed inside you. Alucard exclaimed, a hint of insanity in her eyes. Naruto remained impassive, looking at Alucard, then at the Kyuubi who was still sneering at his direction. Humming slightly, Naruto stepped forward. Kyuubi-san, your terms are agreeable, however, I wish to add something else to our little deal. He said, making the Kyuubi raise a brow, and Alucard to take on a curious expression. And that is, ... when I call for it, You will supply me with both your aid and power." Naruto answered, expression final as he glared at the Kyuubi. Kyuubi's eyes widened slightly, and he growled. True, this would be beneficial to him if the blonde uses his power. Scratch that, it would be extremely useful in aiding him in his escape. But the mere thought of the boy using his power under his command, and not under his influence, was a blow to the Biju's pride. The mere idea of him offering the blonde power at his beck and call. He refused to allow it. Absolutely not, Kyuubi snarled. Naruto stared at the Kyuubi for several moments, before he huffed. Looking at the Kyuubi with glaring eyes, Naruto spoke, "Is that your final answer?" His answer was a growl. "I see, Alucard." Alucard grinned, her grin showing off her fangs, her hair moving wildly as her eyes practically glowed with insanity and glee. Darkness overtook her entire form, leaving only her eyes to be visible. Soon, hundreds of more eyes opened, each of them expressing the same glee and insanity. With Alucard's next words, and what happened after that, Kyuubi experienced an emotion that he had only felt once in his few hundred years of life. A feeling that he almost never felt again, and a feeling that he had forgotten it so much that he had forgotten what it felt like. That emotion was fear. Release arc restrictions levels 1 through 3. After that, the Kyuubi was surprisingly more subdued, and agreed to the blonde's terms. Satisfied, Naruto altered his mindscape, allowing the Kyuubi outside the mountain, and him being released from his cage with the exception of Silver Collar taking its place on the Kyuubi's neck. After that, the Kyuubi explained that since Alucard could connect her mind with his, that he would destroy any memory fragment that concerned Naruto being harmed in any form or way. With that said, the Kyuubi had immediately told them to take a hike, and promptly forced them out of Naruto's mind. As per their agreement, the next time Alucard attempted to delve into the memories of those she devoured within the village, preferably the few shinobi she consumed, they were able to learn various new jutsu for Naruto to learn. Alucard herself was at first interested in the energy known as chakra, but it was merely a curiosity at best. Besides, she always did have her vampiric magic, she hardly needed chakra. It would be useless to her anyway, seeing as she was a living corpse. She did not have a chakra system as hers would have died out anyways. She was undead, and as an undead, she couldn't nor would she ever unlock chakra. Regardless though, she used the knowledge that she had from the few shinobi she consumed, and the blonde was able to advance even further. He now had a good variety of jutsu he learned, and while he hardly mastered all of them, he could perform them to exceptional level. His chakra control was surprising good despite his Jinchuriki status. While it wasn't at the level needed to become a medical ninja, it was far better than most of his fellow Jinchuriki. Although that had yet to be truly proven. To keep up with his chakra control, Naruto made sure to continue performing the tree walking and water walking exercise every morning. The years that went by were quite a small adventure for both Alucard and Naruto. Over their time in the academy, despite him constantly skipping classes, or not attending the academy at all, the civilian council had began seeing the blonde as too powerful, and they feared they were losing control of the demon brat. Numerous times the civilian council have tried to either kick him out of the shinobi program, or to mess with his grades with class. Of course they never did succeed for two reasons. The first being the Sandaime, as when he caught wind of such a thing, he had immediately fired the academy teachers going along with it, and giving the civilian council a harsh talking to. The second reason was surprising, and quite shocking as well. Shimura Danzo, an elder of the village, also supported the blonde, and often at times he had made it known that he did so. Something that shocked his fellow elders, and Hiruzen. The council, along with Hiruzen, had demanded why Danzo's was supporting the blonde-haired Jinchuriki. The civilian council because they refused to believe that one of their elders would support the child, while Sarutobi was more wary and suspicious. Danzo had simply stated that he had no reason to explain himself as of yet, and he refused to do so, despite Sarutobi demanding to speak with him about the matter. However, Naruto could say without a doubt that he had found an ally in Danzo. Despite his methods, Danzo would prove to be a valuable ally, especially considering their first meeting. However, that was a story for another time. Naruto's attention was drawn back into the present when Iruka blew a whistle, Ino, and a pink-haired girl being the last two students on the field. The two girls were covered in scrapes, but they were otherwise unharmed. Alright everyone, the second portion of the Genin exams is now finished, and now it is time to partake in the final portion of the exam. That being ninjutsu. If you would please just follow me, I'll escort you back into the classroom for the final exam. Naruto sighed as he decided to wait for the majority of the class to enter the academy building, following Iruka to the classroom. Ino had tried to get his attention by waving at him, Sakura giving a small blush, also giving a small wave to both him and Sasuke as the black-haired Uchiha passed them. That was another thing about Sakura. She often deviated between the two, cheering on him as he was partaking in spars, and also cheering on Sasuke when he spared. However, when they spared against each other, she would freeze, and appeared to have a difficult decision on who to cheer for. Naruto mentally snorted. That girl came from a civilian family, with her father being a retired shinobi. She had potential to be a good medical ninja with her control, but as Alucard would say, she is nothing but spare blood. Naruto would give her a month. If after a month she didn't prove to be a competent shinobi, she would forever be labeled as spare blood for Alucard to feast upon. He just hoped that Alucard did not gain some her more outspoken traits should his precious servant decide to consume her. I resent that, master. I would never even think of consuming that girl. As I stated last time, she is the emergency blood supply unless she proves useful. Alucard piped in. Right, Naruto dryly replied. With a sigh, Naruto hopped down from his perch on the tree, and quickly vanished in a burst of speed when his feet hit the ground. He reappeared in front of the classroom, and he casually entered, ignoring the bickering of his fellow classmates as they all were chattering excitedly about becoming shinobi. How naive these children are. Did they really expect to save princesses and the nobles often? Truly amusing, yet at the same time aggravating. Alucard once again chimed. Naruto could imagine the grin she had on her face. You can hardly blame them, Alucard. Outside of their homes and village, they have not yet experienced any type of pain that would harden them to the cruelties of life. Naruto responded. True, but that is another reason that I have in my list that makes you both a beautiful and wonderful creature in my eyes. Naruto tried not smile, instead he pulled up on his hood, and let obscure his face, his lips twitching only slightly before they stopped. How many reasons do you have now? 2990 Master. Another thing that Alucard had just recently got the habit of doing. She literally kept count of all the reasons why she believed Naruto to be the most beautiful creature and most wonderful master in her eyes. Naruto did not know when this habit of hers started, and at first it creeped him out. However, he learned to just accept it and move on. Master, Dolphin and Dead Man Walking are preparing to begin the final examen. Another thing to note, Alucard loved giving nicknames to everyone. She had named Sakura Emergency Blood Supply, Kiba was named Fido, Shino was named Bugs, Shikamaru was named Sloth, Kuji was named Lard, Ino was named Emergency Blood Supply No. 2, no surprise there, Hinata was named Dead Stalker. Because Alucard wanted to kill her for stalking her master. She named Iruka Dolphin, and as for Mizuki, he was simply named Dead Man Walking. Naruto was inclined to agree. Okay class, we and Mizuki will be calling for your name individually in the next room. Keep in mind that you must perform 3 of the Academy's basic jutsu in order to pass. You can even perform another jutsu you know for extra points. With that said, Iruka called the name of student, and escorted him out the class, and into another room. Excitedly, the other Genin hopefuls began animatedly talking among themselves. Each of them hoping to pass, and become proud shinobi. It is very likely that most of the students here will die on their first C-rank mission, or maybe they'll quit after they receive proper training from the Jonin sensei. Indeed, the only ones who actually stand a chance are the clan heirs, and a few of the ones from civilian families. The rest are mere cannon fodder, unimportant and forgetful. Naruto responded. My, master. How cruel of you, thinking about such things about your comrades. Alucard teased, a slight mock in her voice. While the words may have been scolding, Naruto just knew that Alucard was grinning widely at his words, and that there was a hint of approval in her tone. Master, I'm curious, which team do you believe you shall be in? Good question. I'm the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and rumors has it Uchiha Madara was able to control tailed beasts with the likes of his Sharingan with but a single gaze. If I'm correct, they will place me on a team with a wielder of the Sharingan as a precaution. However, there are only 2 people within this village who are in possession of the Sharingan. Uchiha Sasuke, the last Uchiha within the village. However, he has yet to truly unlock the Sharingan. The second, Hitaki Kakashi, someone that we know little about as the memories of the very few Jonin you consumed revealed nearly nothing about the man. At best the best description we have is that he reads a certain orange book, he's always late, his face is covered 99% of the time, and he is generally lazy. So you believe they will place you on a team with either Duck Boy or the perverted Scarecrow? Yes, although there is a high probability that Hitaki Kakashi is most likely going to teach me, seeing as he is lazy, teaching me will be easier. As Sasuke is an Uchiha and is the second top student with me being the first. They cannot place me with Sasuke as it is usually the rookie of the year along with the top Kunoichi with the dead last. I doubt they would stop tradition just to have Sasuke on my team. Plus Sasuke is inexperienced with the Sharingan, thus giving even more reason to have Hitaki on Sasuke's team. Although I doubt it will actually happen. But wouldn't they want the perverted Scarecrow to teach Duck Boy about the Sharingan? Sasuke can easily learn more about his Sharingan from the Uchiha clan scrolls within the Uchiha compound. Besides, Hitaki is not even an Uchiha. Thus there is many who doubt that Hitaki can use the true power of the Sharingan, despite many claiming that he mastered it. Besides, from what I heard about Elder Kaharu and Elder Homura, they are very traditional. They wouldn't set a team with 3 of the best students even if the entire world was being engulfed in the flames of hell. An amusing thought, master. Now I want to watch the world burn. Your need for blood and destruction is duly noted. You'll be able to receive as much blood and destruction as you want once I graduate. I eagerly await for it, master. Hey Uzumaki, your turn. Naruto blinked slowly, and allowed his eyes to drift towards Sasuke, who was staring at the blonde with indifference. The Konoha headband bared on his forehead proudly. A flash of some sort of emotion went through the young Uchiha's eyes before it vanished. Nodding his head towards the Uchiha, Naruto stood, and walked down the stairs, removing his hood as he did so. Naruto entered the next room, and his neutral gaze was instantly with the warm gaze of Iruka, and the blank, yet suspiciously glaring gaze of Mizuki. Ah, Naruto, just who we were waiting for. It's time for your final test of the Genin exams, are you ready? Iruka asked. Naruto snorted slightly. Was he ready? He had been training for this day since the academy. He could easily defeat a mid-level Chunin, and give a high-level Chunin a good run for his money, but anything higher than that would pose a problem. Nonetheless, the blonde nodded his head, and Iruka smiled. Very well, now I want you to perform the substitution jutsu, transformation jutsu, and the clone jutsu, along with an extra one if you want. Naruto sighed slightly, before he wordlessly performed the substitution without any hand signs, his form being replaced with a chair. It's amazing that you're able to perform the technique with no hand signs. Iruka said in amazement. Naruto grunted as he returned to his spot, and wordlessly he performed the transformation jutsu again with no hand signs, his form being engulfed in smoke as the transformation went underway. Both Iruka and Mizuki held their breaths, wondering what the blonde would transform into. When the smoke cleared, Iruka could not stop the slight widening of his eyes, while Mizuki openly gaped. Standing in front of the 2 Chunin was a man with black spiky hair that reached down to his waist, his bangs covering his right eye entirely. He was wearing red armor that was comprised of numerous metal plates, and a black bodysuit underneath. His face held a deep scowl as he looked at the 2 Chunin. Red eyes with 3 tomo slowly rotated in a slow and hypnotizing manner. Standing before them was a perfect replica of a shinobi that was rivaled only by the Shodaime Hokage. Uchiha Madara, an excellent transformation, Naruto, Iruka stated in slight awe. He idly wondered if that was how the legendary Uchiha Madara really looked, before he shook his head slightly. Knowing that Madara was a shinobi that Naruto admired the most, he knew the blonde wouldn't get the appearance wrong. Although Iruka did worry for the blonde as times. After all, Madara was a traitor to the village. Knowing that his soon-to-be former student admired him worried him at times. You may undo the transformation now Naruto, Iruka said. The replica of Madara blinked, before smoke covered its form, and Naruto stood in its place. Now perform the clone jutsu. This is where Naruto improvised. No matter how good his chakra control was, he knew he would never be able to perform the clone jutsu. Seeing as it required that bare minimum of chakra, so he performed another clone jutsu. He was once again glad that Alucard had consumed a Jonin, despite the Jonin being a low-level one. With a poof of smoke, a perfect copy of the blonde appeared next to him. It should be noted that once again, the blonde did not use any hand signs. Excellent Naruto, Iruka exclaimed, beaming a grin towards the blonde. You've performed all 3 basic jutsu perfectly, and with no hand signs no less. For such a display, I believe that deserves extra credit. Grinning, Iruka quickly wrote down into his clipboard, and once again smiled at the blonde. Now is there another jutsu you wish to display? Naruto narrowed his eyes, and shook his head. Why would he reveal the techniques at his disposal? It was foolish, and foolhardy. Very well then, please return to class, and wait for me and Mizuki to return. Here is your headband, proof of you graduating. Congratulations Naruto, Iruka said with a large smile, handing the blonde a Konoha headband. Naruto grabbed hold of the headband, but didn't put it on right away. He looked at it for a moment, before he tied it around his forehead. He made a mental note to change the color of the cloth. You've done it, master. We can no longer be held back by the academy. Now our true adventures begin. I cannot wait, master, Alucard said through their mental connection. Turning away from Iruka and Mizuki, Naruto exited the classroom, grinning as he looked out the window. A sense of excitement and anticipation welling up inside him. Yes, we are one step closer to our goal, Alucard. The adventures that await us will prove entertaining. I just hope that I am able to enjoy a lot of good fights out of it. Naruto said in response, his grin turning bloodthirsty as he felt the need to fight powerful opponents. To test himself against powerful shinobi. To fight in life or death battles. Call the blonde slightly battle-crazed, but for some reason he only truly ever felt alive when he was fighting. And of course I shall stand by you to the very end, master. Behind the blonde, his shadow began rising until it began to take shape. In a few moments Alucard's form stood behind her master. Her lips pulled back into a wide grin, her scarlet eyes flashing with devotion and undying loyalty to the blonde before her. Her head soon rested on the blonde's shoulder, and her arms encircling around his chest. She inhaled, taking in her master's scent, and she nearly purred as Naruto's hand gently caressed her cheek. Time to return to class, Naruto murmured as he quickly regained his composure, the red hue to his cheeks fading as he went into his blank mask. A hateful look crossed Alucard's face when she gazed down the hallway, her eyes glaring at the door leading towards her master's class. The muffled sounds of excitement annoying the no-life queen as she resisted the urge to kill everyone in the room. Alucard. Turning her head, Alucard's eyes stared into her master blue ones. His lips pulled into a small frown as he gave Alucard a stern look. Rein in your anger and hatred, Alucard. There is a time and a place, and this is not one of them, he stated. Alucard frowned for a moment, before she grinned. One day her master was going to snap, and order her to kill every single being within range. When that day comes, she was going to happily follow that order. And perhaps some villagers from Konoha would, accidentally, get in the way. Of course, master. The black-haired girl said as her scarlet eyes shined for a moment. Naruto stared at the no-life queen for several long moments, idly wondering what she was thinking about. While they had a mental connection, he could only get a vague idea of what she was thinking about. Let's just say that it involved a lot of blood. Sighing, Naruto decided not to indulge too much into the matter. Facing the door to his classroom, he began walking towards it, Alucard already melting into the shadows beneath him. He re-entered the classroom, and ignoring all the cheers from his fangirls about him passing, he quickly retook his spot in the back. Crossing his arms, and quietly waiting for Iruka to finish testing, the other students left. It didn't take long for Iruka to finish testing the stranglers, maybe 30 minutes at best. Now the scarred Chunin was standing in front of the class, smiling at all of them as they quieted down. Everyone, I want to congratulate you on passing your genin exams. From now on I am no longer your sensei. I am now a superior and comrade. You will face many hardships during your shinobi career, but you must push through and keep yourself strong. You have all taken your first step into adulthood, and I wish you all the best of luck. I am proud of you all, and I was honored to be able to teach you during your time in the academy. Iruka gazed upon all his former students proudly, and his proud gaze lingered on Naruto's form longer than the rest. Naruto, feeling Iruka's gaze, stared into Iruka's eyes. He noted the proud look in the man's eyes, and he hesitated slightly. How should he respond? He kept his face perfectly neutral, but inside he was a little uncertain. Finally, the blonde sighed slightly. Just this one single time. With that thought, the blonde made sure that his now former classmates weren't looking, and he gave Iruka a small smile. Iruka, seeing the blonde's smile, felt his eyes widen slightly. A warm smile took hold of Iruka's face, and his eyes stared into Naruto's eyes, silently trying to convey a message to the blonde. To Naruto, that message was clear. Be safe, and give it your best, Naruto. Naruto snorted slightly. His face went to his usual mask of cold neutrality, but not before giving Iruka a silent message of his own. You worry too much. Iruka chuckled lowly, before he continued to cast his gaze upon the others. Unseen to everyone, Naruto's shadow bristled slightly. Iruka felt the feeling of impending death, but he ignored it in favor of speaking to his former students once more. Now everyone, come back within the following week to get your team assignments, and once again. I'm proud of every single one of you. With that said, the bell rung, and the newly made genins all stood as one, and exited the classroom. Some giving Iruka grateful looks, and others giving the scarred Chunin a firm handshake. As Naruto walked past, he merely gave Iruka a nod, with the Chunin returning it. With the Hokage's office, Sarutobi Hiruzen looked upon the gathered jonin before him. Sitting in front of him was a crystal ball that was showing the image of graduating class of students who passed the genin exams. Standing on his right and left side were the elders of Konoha, Homura, and Kaharu. The Sandaime Hokage was an old man in his 60s, his face carrying many wrinkles, and 3 lines placed vertically under his eyes. His hair that was once black was ash white, slightly spiked, and he had a small beard on his chin. He wore the usual Hokage robes, with the exception of the Hokage hat. So, do any of you have any interest in the students before you? He asked, his voice raspy given his age. The various jonin all thought for a few moments, before someone stepped forward. Hiruzen smiled slightly as he saw his son, Sarutobi Asuma, stepped forward. If it's not any trouble, I would like to have Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, and Akamichi Kuji. He began. Reasons. Kaharu demanded stiffly, and curtly. Her lips formed into a stern frown as her closed eyes somehow regarded Asuma with a demanding gaze. Asuma straightened only slightly, well aware that the elders were not lenient to disrespect as his father was. The Nara, Yamanaka, and Akamichi clans have always looked out for each other, even during the era of the clan wars. So much so that when the formation of the villages began, the 3 clans joined together, and have always had teams with each other. It an unofficial tradition between the clans. Plus, they could be the next Inoshika Cho trio. He added as an afterthought. The 2 elders whispered among themselves, with Sarutobi humming as he whispered along with them. For several long moments the elders and the Sandaime whispered among themselves before they turned their gazes towards Asuma, who stood stiffly and rigidly. Hiruzen smiled as his son as he spoke. Sarutobi Asuma, your request is granted. Yamanaka Ino, along with Nara Shikamaru, and Akamichi Kuji shall become your genin squad. Asuma visibly relaxed, smiling to himself as he went back to stand among the other jonin. For the next several minutes other jonin stepped up to claim students for their genin team. Some being rejected, others accepted. In the end, some jonin got the teams they wanted, while others didn't. However, now came for the final 4 students. And now the final 4 students. Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke, Uzumaki Naruto, and Shimono Keigo. Hiruzen stated. Uchiha Sasuke, grades almost equal to Uzumaki Naruto, and the second best student in the academy. A contender for the Rookie of the Year title. Uzumaki Naruto, grades higher than any other student despite missing so many classes. His grades are nearly equal to that of Uchiha Itachi. He was merely off by 20 marks. Haruno Sakura, the best kunoichi of the year. Koharu said, as if she couldn't believe such a thing. It says here her genjutsu is to be noted as well as her chakra control. And finally, Shimono Keigo, the dead last of the academy. He barely passed, him only passing because of the written portion, and he was able to just barely perform the 3 basic jutsu. The elder woman finished. Seems like there is an odd one out. A jonin murmured. Then allow me to fix that. A brash and cheerful voice exclaimed. The jonin all startled in surprise as a woman shoved her way through the crowd. Her purple hair tied into a spiked ponytail, pupilless brown eyes twinkling with mischief. Her lips were pulled back into a wide grin as she chewed on a stick of dango. Her outfit consisting of a fishnet shirt, a tan-colored trench coat that concealed her barely covered breast, and a dark brown miniskirt. The elders bristled in distaste as they glared disapprovingly at her choice of attire. Hiruzen merely sweat dropped. Mitarashi Anko, might I inquire as to what you meant when you said to allow you to fix our current situation? Koharu demanded. Anko merely grinned. Allow me to take one of those cute little brats as my apprentice. The elders glanced at each other as the other jonin whispered among themselves. If let you take one of them as your apprentice, which one would you choose? Kona has one and only Uzumaki Naruto, of course. The purple-haired woman announced with a bright grin. Instantly the atmosphere between the elders shifted, and they silently glared at Anko. Absolutely not, Homura began, and he continued before Anko could protest. It has always been a tradition to have the rookie of the year with the top kunoichi, and the dead last. Did you think that just because there was an odd one out that we would stop tradition? He finished. But surely you can make an exception. You said it yourself that the Uchiha's score was almost equal to Naruto's. I think he would make a fine member for the team while I take Naruto as my apprentice. It'll all even out that way. Anko pressed. Koharu shook her head as she stepped forward. That is not the point, Mitarashi. The point is that tradition must be kept, there can be no exception. Since it is uneven, we shall simply remove Shimono-san from the equation. The elderly woman stated. Perhaps we can let tradition go this one time. A raspy and elderly cold voice announced. The jonin all started in surprise, while Hiruzen and the elders did not look surprised at all. Danzo, I was wondering when you would reveal yourself. Hiruzen stated, his voice blank and neutral. Out from the shadows of the corner, Danzo stepped forward, his bandaged form gazing upon the shinobi in the room with cold narrow eyes. Even at your old age you are still able to sense me, Hiruzen. Excellent. Just as expected from a cage. The war hawk spoke. Danzo, what did you mean when you said, letting tradition go? Koharu demanded. Danzo turned his cold gaze to Koharu, exactly as I meant it. While I agree that Shimono will end being possibility useless, there will still be some use to him. Uchiha Sasuke can be Uzumaki Naruto's replacement in the team assignments, while Uzumaki receives apprenticeship. The elders seemed to think on it, and Anko grinned, feeling confident that Naruto would her apprentice. Although Danzo's next words shattered that confidence. However, Uzumaki Naruto will not receive apprenticeship from Mitarashi-san. Danzo finished. What? Anko yelled in anger. Why can't I teach the gaki? She asked, anger filling her voice as she angrily glared at the bandaged war hawk. Danzo opened his eye, and regarded Anko coldly. Do not take that tone with me, Mitarashi. Respect your betters. He calmly spoke, angering Anko further. As for the reason as to why you cannot teach Uzumaki, there are a multitude of reasons in fact. You are not even a full jonin, you are a tokubetsu jonin. You have never had any student, claiming that you did not want to teach, brats, as you put it. You have no experience when it comes to teaching, thus you'd be an incompetent sensei. Anko looked down, the anger was still burning in her eyes, and her fists were clenching tightly. Despite how much she wanted to argue with Danzo, deep down, she knew he was right. Hiruzen looked at Scene with a frown, mentally deciding to speak to Danzo about the way he spoke to his shinobi. Seeing Anko silent, Danzo continued. Uzumaki needs a sensei that surpasses that of regular jonin. The boy is a Jinchuriki. Standard training methods wouldn't work on him. A unique teacher is needed to teach him, someone who has learned dozens of styles and jutsu. Someone who could teach the boy several key things. And someone who can teach the boy about his legacy, Danzo claimed. The room was silent as everyone processed the information. Most were confused by what Danzo meant when he said, his legacy. What did their elder mean by that? However, Hiruzen and the elders, along with a very few Jonin, knew exactly what Danzo meant. As it stands, there are only 2 others who meet these requirements. I understand that one of them has already expressed an interest in teaching the boy. Hiruzen nodded. True. Unfortunately, however, he is late. Again, the Sandaime said with a sigh. Danzo scowled. Yes, how unfortunate that one of our best Jonin still has that habit. Ma, I just got here, Sandaime-sama, Danzo-sama. Surely you can give this one little lateness of mine slide. With that said, a poof of smoke accompanied the voice, and when it cleared, the form of a man in his late 20s appeared. He wore the standard Jonin attire. His hair was gray, and seemed to defy gravity with the way it stood. Nearly his entire face was covered, leaving only his right covered. In his hands was very familiar orange book, which received several glares from the females in the room. Hitaki Kakashi. The Jonin in question looked up, meeting Danzo's cold and stoic gaze. You've a lot of nerve, boy. Coming here late, and you have the audacity to read that thing in my presence. The elder said in distaste as he glared at the book. Forgive me, Sandaime-sama, Danzo-sama. But I was on my way over here when. Save your excuses for someone who cares. Hiruzen may tolerate your habits and antics. However, I am not Hiruzen. Danzo interrupted. Danzo, the Sandaime said in a warning tone. Danzo snorted quietly. Very well. As you know, you have the option of take Uzumaki Naruto as an apprentice. If you chose not take the boy, then I'll gladly take him as my student. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes. No matter what, he could not allow Danzo to get Naruto as his student. The mere thought of what Danzo might do to the boy, it chilled him slightly, despite how hardened he was to such things. Ma, Kakashi began, stashing his book in his pouch. It's fine, Danzo-sama, I'm perfectly fine with teaching Naruto. In fact, nothing will please me more. Then it is decided. Hiruzen spoke. Hitaki Kakashi will take Uzumaki Naruto as his apprentice, while Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, and Shimono Kage shall form Team 7. But wait, Koharu spoke up. Wouldn't it be better to have Hitaki Kakashi teach Uchiha Sasuke, in order to teach him about the Sharingan? The Uchiha can easily obtain that information about his Dujutsu from his clan archives. Danzo curtly explained, speaking to Koharu as one would a child. Koharu remained silent at that. However, she bristled slightly. This meeting is now adjourned until the next Genin exams. Dismissed, Hiruzen announced. The various Jonin all quietly left the room, some of them making flashy exits via the body flicker. Kakashi prepared to leave as well, but he was stopped by a hand on his shoulder. Turning his head, his eyes met with pupilless brown. Let's talk, Kakashi, Anko growled, before they disappeared via body flicker. Hiruzen shook his head at the display, and he turned head to see Homura and Koharu leaving as well. Danzo remaining where he stood. Once Danzo and Hiruzen were alone, Danzo spoke. May I ask when you are going to dispel the shadow clone that has several shuriken pointed at me? The scared man casually stated. Hiruzen scowled, before a popping sound was heard, and a cloud of smoke cleared from behind Danzo. What are you planning, Danzo? Hiruzen stated. Danzo kept his expressionless facade. I've no idea what you are talking about, Hiruzen. I'm not planning anything. Now if you'll excuse me, there are matters I must attend to. With that said, the bandaged elder made his way out the room. Hiruzen scowled for a moment, before he sighed. He looked at his crystal ball, watching as the image of Naruto walking through the village with a cold expression. Naruto-kun, he thought sadly, before he gave a tired sigh. He lit his pipe, and breathed out several plumes of smoke, allowing himself to relax slightly. After several more plumes of smoke, the Sandaime set his pipe down, and began to write down on some documents on his desk. He had to finalize the teams. He just hoped that Kakashi would be able to bring Naruto out of his shell. With that thought, he brightened slightly, and resumed his working. Idly pondering what Danzo was thinking, and what he was planning. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage, a shinobi regarded as the shinobi no kami, and hailed as the professor, carefully examined the picture he held in his hands. The picture was Naruto's shinobi identification. Humming as he examined it, he looked past the picture, and to the person in question sitting in the chair with a scowl identical to the one in the picture. Stroking his beard slightly, Sarutobi puffed out a few clouds of smoke. Setting down the picture, the Sandaime smiled warmly as he removed the pipe from his lips. An excellent picture you have here, Naruto-kun. Not many manage to keep a straight face when taking their identification pictures. The only ones who kept a straight face, to be honest, were you, Sasuke-kun, and Shino-kun. He told the blonde. Unseen to the Sandaime, Naruto's shadow bristled when he added the kun suffix to the blonde's name. The blonde himself kept his facial expression blank, his scowl lessening a mere centimeter. Nodding his head towards the Hokage, Naruto spoke. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Your praise is much appreciated. He told him. Smiling, Sarutobi placed his smoking pipe back into his mouth. Blowing out a few more clouds of smoke, the Sandaime spoke. You have the headband, your identification. You also have the skills and knowledge. I officially welcome you into the ranks of Konoha Shinobi, Naruto-kun. Naruto rose an eyebrow. Do you do this with every new genin? Or am I just special? He asked, a hint of teasing in his tone. Of course you'll always be special to me, master. Alucard happily told him, sending him a mental picture of her grinning face. Naruto's cheeks colored slightly, before he quickly fought it down. I know, Alucard. Just as you'll always be special to me as well. Alucard didn't respond, but Naruto knew she was very happy with his answer as he felt her happiness from their mental link. The blonde was brought out of his mental conversation when Sarutobi chuckled warmly. I usually don't do this, Naruto-kun, you're right about that. You are a special case, however. Hiruzen told him, smiling at the blonde. Looking down at the assorted files in his hand, the Sandaime silently hummed, unaware as his shadow rose from the ground to take the form of Alucard. Naruto rose an eyebrow when he saw her, but kept silent, curious as to what she was doing. Alucard gave a small wink towards the blonde, before she looked over the Sandaime's shoulder, intently gazing at the files he was looking over. Grinning widely, she suppressed a dark chuckle when she read an interesting line. Master, it appears Uchiha-san has a few screws loose. She informed her master. Raising an eyebrow, an interested gleam entered the blonde's eyes. How so? Smiling a bit too widely, Alucard nearly snickered. It says here that he has an obsessive, borderline fanatical need and desire to kill his older brother. It says here there is a 47% possibility that Uchiha-san will leave the village and become a missing nin to hunt down his brother. Sees comrades as a waste of time, and is perfectly willing to kill anyone who gets in the way of his goal in his eyes. The undead female responded. Naruto silently hummed. Fairly accurate. What else does it say? Smirking, Alucard allowed herself to quietly snicker. It also says here that Uchiha-san is showing signs of the infamous Uchiha arrogance. It says that once Uchiha-san has unlocked the Sharingan, he will train using only the Sharingan until he reaches the third Tomo, in which he believes he'll be able to stand up to his brother on equal footing. Naruto scowled lightly, eyes darkening by just a small amount. Typical of most Uchiha, the Sharingan is a tool, not a crutch to be used constantly. Indeed, master, such eyes, while extremely powerful, end up becoming a liability if you rely upon it for much too long. Alucard replied, continuing to lean over the Sandaime's shoulder. She remained like that for a few moments, before a lock of her long raven black hair swayed into the Sandaime's eyesight. Slightly startled at the black movement in his vision, Sarutobi quickly turned around, only to find nothing behind him. Blinking in surprise, Sarutobi darted his eyes around, not noticing a lump disappearing into his shadow. Sighing, Sarutobi turned back around, meeting Naruto's neutral face as the blonde silently rose an eyebrow at him. Jumping at your own shadow, Hokage-sama? He asked lightly. Frowning for a moment as he closed the file on his desk, Sarutobi chuckled for a moment as he gave a grandfatherly smile. Yes, seems like I'm beginning to become senile and paranoid in my old age, Naruto-kun. I'll need a successor pretty soon at this rate. The Sandaime chuckled, giving the blonde a small glance at the word successor. Smiling lightly, Naruto spoke. Well then, you'll need someone just as wise and powerful as you, Hokage-sama. That way, you can enjoy a peaceful retirement without anything to worry about. Chuckling, Sarutobi fondly patted his desk. Yes, sadly however, not many shinobi fit the requirements to become Hokage. I can name only 3 with the potential to keep this village strong and stable should I step down again. Naruto rose an eyebrow. Oh, may I inquire as to who those people are? Smiling, Sarutobi saw no harm in answering. Of course not. The first is one of my old students. Jiraiya of the Sannin, although I fear for the bathhouses should he take the hat. He said with a sweat drop. There's also Tsunade of the Sannin as well. But I fear for the village's money reserves should she take the mantle. He said with a grimace. The final one is Hitaki Kakashi. But he doesn't have cage-level strength just yet. Plus, I doubt he's even interested in the job. He finished with a shrug. Seems like you'll need to wait a bit longer until another more trustworthy shinobi appears within your ranks, Hokage-sama. Naruto spoke. Chuckling, Sarutobi agreed with the blonde. Before any more conversation could take place, the door to the office was thrown open as a young child the age of 9 barged in. The child gave a battle cry as he charged at the aged Sandaime. Sarutobi only looked at the scene with a sigh as he boredly took a puff of his pipe. Not even 5 steps into the room, and the child tripped on his own feet, falling face down to the floor. Naruto could hear Alucard's cackles of amusement as he himself fought down an amused smirk. Hey, what happened? The child asked, tears of pain in his eyes as he glared at nothing. Seeing the blonde from the corner of his eye, the child pointed an accusing finger towards Naruto, glaring at the blonde angrily. You tripped me, didn't you? Losing his amused smirk, Naruto neutrally glared at the child as Alucard bristled at the boy for wrongly accusing her master. You're tripped over your own feet, child. Don't be so ignorant and foolish as to blame someone else due to your oversight. Naruto responded in kind in a cold neutral tone. Shivering slightly, the boy glared at the blonde. You tripped me. I know you did. Don't lie to me. Because of you I couldn't defeat the old man. He yelled childishly. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto gave the child a look over before he snorted lightly, Alucard laughing at the thought of a child defeating a full veteran legend like the Sandaime. As if a child like you could ever measure up the level Hokage-sama stands. Naruto said harshly. Of course I am positive that you will reach a level beyond that, master. Alucard chimed, outwardly not reacting to her comment. Naruto mentally thanked her before he turned his attention to the child in front of him who was gritting his teeth and balling his small fists. I will defeat the old man and become Hokage. And I'll start by beating you. With that said, the child rushed at blonde, his small fists raised as he was prepared to strike the blonde. Snorting, Naruto held out his hand, and flickered his finger on the boy's forehead, sending the child tumbling back as he landed on his butt. Holding his forehead for a moment, the boy became angry again as he charged the blonde. Sighing in annoyance, Naruto moved to the side, and tripped the boy, making him fall face first to the ground. That time, I tripped you, he stated lightly. Growling angrily, the child stood and glared at the blonde. Fight me for real, he demanded. Snorting, Naruto gave the boy a cold look. Please, what type of person would ever take a child seriously? When you wear a headband like mine, only then will I consider taking you seriously, he told the boy bluntly. Growling in anger again, the boy stood and rushed the blonde again, giving a battle cry as he did so. Sighing, Naruto brushed the child's fists away, and picked him up by the collar of his shirt with a single arm. You never learn, do you? Naruto said with a small glare. Before anything else could transpire, another person barged into the room. The male who barged in wore a blue bandana on his head with the Konoha forehead protector embedded on it. He wore the standard Konoha Jonin outfit, with the only thing truly standing out being the black sunglasses he wore. Honorable grandson, do not run off like that, the Jonin scolded, before he noticed the person holding the boy. Scowling, the man glared at the blonde through his glasses. It's him, the Kyuubi brat, he thought in disdain. Naruto gave a small glance over at the man's direction, before he returned his gaze to the boy in his arms. Ignoring Alucard's murmurs of how she was going to kill the man for daring to look at her master with such eyes. "Let me go, jerk," the child yelled, struggling to release himself from Naruto's grip. Scowling, Naruto pulled back his arm, preparing to lightly hit the child on the head. "It appears no one has taught you proper discipline yet, child," Naruto spoke, voice low but still audible. "Allow me to be the first one to teach you discipline." With that said, Naruto was prepared to delve his fist into the boy's head. However, he was stopped by the Jonin. "Stop. Don't you dare lay on hand on the honorable grandson. His grandfather, Hokage-sama, will not stand for this," the Jonin demanded, smirking when Naruto stopped. "This brat is Hokage-sama's grandson," Naruto thought, glancing at the Sandaime who was watching the events before him with a neutral expression. Feeling Naruto's grip slacken slightly, the boy grinned. "That's right, so you better put me down right now," the child demanded. "You're just like the rest of them," he thought in disappointment. Looking at the child in his grip for the moment, Naruto snorted before he hit the boy with the head with his fist lightly. Despite it being light, it was enough for the boy to yelp in pain as it felt as if he was hit in the head with a rock. Holding his head in pain in his spot on the ground, the boy looked at Naruto with shock and a hint of respect. "I could care less if Hokage-sama was your grandmother," the blonde stated coldly. Turning to the Sandaime, he bowed lightly as the Hokage gave the blonde a small smile. "If that is all, Hokage-sama, I shall take my leave." Walking past the shell-shocked Jonin, Naruto stopped at the doorway. Glancing over his shoulder to look at the boy still nursing his head. "One more thing, child," he began, causing the boy to look at him. "If you truly do intend to defeat Hokage-sama and becoming Hokage, might I offer a suggestion?" he stated rather than asked. "Stop tripping your own feet." With that said, the blonde promptly left. Snapping out of his shock after Naruto left, the Jonin grew angry as spoke to the Sandaime. "Hokage-sama, surely you're not gonna let him get away with that," he yelled. Glancing at the Jonin, Sarutobi leveled a hard stare at the child who began squirming at his grandfather's look. Naruto-kun was right about one thing. He began, taking a puff from his pipe. "Konohamaru, you lack discipline and manners. I know I've told you more than once to never barge into my office while I am meeting with someone." Konohamaru looked down at his grandfather's stern look. "The mere fact that you still do this despite the few hundred times I've told you not to, tells me that I've been far too lenient with you. It also tells me that the tutor I've assigned to you has not been doing his job," he stated, giving the Jonin a glare to which the Jonin paled a little. "Thus, it appears that I will have to personally discipline you in proper etiquette and manners," he stated, idly fingering a piece of chalk. Konohamaru idly wondered where his grandfather got the piece of chalk and what it was for. "From now on, starting tomorrow, you will meet me here at 6 in the morning, and Ebisu, due to your negligence in properly teaching my grandchild, you will do D ranks for the rest of the week," Sarutobi stated, making Ebisu pale in horror. "6 in the morning. Isn't that a bit early, Gramps?" Konohamaru whined. The boy found out the purpose to why his grandfather had a piece of chalk as it suddenly sailed through the air and nailed him straight on the forehead. "From now on, when I am in my office, or when I am in these robes, you will address me as Hokage-sama, understood?" Sarutobi scolded. "But, understood," the Sandaime repeated sternly. Downtrodden, the boy nodded. "Good. Now then, tell me, Konohamaru, what did I tell you 100 times not to do?" he asked, fingering another piece of chalk. Gulping, Konohamaru answered. "Not to barge in your office during a meeting," he answered. "Correct. And what did you do anyway?" "Barged into your office anyway." The chalk sailed through the air and nailed the boy on the head once again. "Correct. And what are you supposed to do when you wish to enter an office?" Sarutobi asked lightly, Konohamaru watching in horror as the old cage began fingering several pieces of chalk. Knock. A piece of chalk nailed Konohamaru on the forehead again. "Correct." It was at that moment, Konohamaru realized that it was gonna be a long day. Walking through the streets of Konoha, Naruto gave a small scowl as he walked past villagers who were content to ignore him completely. Some would have the courage to glare at the blonde, but they immediately looked away when Naruto responded with a cold stare in return. Still scowling, the blonde stopped at a fruit stand, eyeing a few pieces of fruit. The owner of the stand scowled at the blonde, but otherwise did nothing else. Taking an apple, the blonde placed down a bill of Ryo before he resumed his trek down the street. Content to let the villagers ignore him. They should all be bending their knees to you, master. Such worms do not deserve to even kiss the ground you walk upon. Alucard said with a small snarl, the blonde's shadow bristling slightly. Naruto did not respond to Alucard's comment, preferring to finish off his apple as he threw the remains of it in a nearby garbage can. Placing his hands in his pockets, Naruto continued walking through the streets of the village until he reached one of the village's many parks. Glancing around and seeing a few people in the park, the blonde sat down on one of the benches. Shutting his eyes as he leaned back, the blonde sighed as he relaxed. The blonde allowed himself to relax in the silent and peaceful air the park gave off, enjoying as he felt Alucard's cold presence within his mind grant him warmth. Master, someone is approaching you, Alucard warned, the shadows beneath the blonde bristling slightly. Opening his eyes, the blonde sighed lightly as he sat straighter. Moments later, a bandaged elderly man sat next to him. Naruto nodded his head in greeting. Danzo-san, he said politely. Uzumaki. Danzo returned politely. It was silent between the two for several long moments, before Danzo finally spoke. I'm sure you're curious as to who your sensei is, along with your teammates. He stated. Naruto didn't give him an answer, preferring to close his eyes, and silently making a gesturing for him to continue. Instead of being given a normal team, you shall be placed under apprenticeship under the teachings of Hitaki Kakashi. However, I suspect you may have a second sensei. Merely a hunch I have. Danzo said. Naruto frowned, eyes narrowing slightly. That doesn't give me as much freedom as I hoped. The murmured. Looks my plans will be delayed once more. Naruto thought with a scowl. Fret not, master. I am positive you will be able to complete your plans, regardless of such annoying delays. Alucard spoke. Your confidence in me is appreciated, Alucard. Naruto responded. Is that all you wanted to tell me, Danzo-san? Among other things, Danzo answered. Reaching into his robes, the elderly man took out a scroll, passing it to the boy beside him. Taking the scroll, Naruto examined it critically before pocketing it. After Naruto pocketed the scroll, Danzo stood. I shall take my leave now, he said, giving Naruto's shadow a small glance. His eye narrowed just slightly as he saw a single crimson eye in the blonde's shadow before it disappeared. Ah yes, Uzumaki's dark angel, that is actually the closet I've ever come to seeing it, he thought. He had always suspected that Naruto had some sort of protector watching over him. But he never had any evidence. He knew something was there watching over the blonde, but he couldn't sense it. It was almost as if it were a lifeless being. The only reason Danzo even knew it ever exited was because of the feeling of coldness and death it radiated, a feeling that made even him shiver in primal fear. Naruto's protector was a truly frightening being. Uzumaki. Danzo spoke, gaining the blonde's attention. Your goal is a dangerous path. Some might even say an impossible goal. But I find it admirable, realistic, and very much possible. You can count on the Foundation's support when the time comes, he told him. With that said, the shinobi of darkness turned, and walked away. His form becoming smaller the further he got. Are you certain we can trust that man, master? Alucard asked with a grin. You know the answer to that, Alucard. Alucard chuckled. Indeed, master. When it's time, we will have Danzo-san's full support, along with his root. Alucard stated, pleased that her master's plans were slowly coming together. Your plans are coming together perfectly, master. Soon your ultimate goal shall come to fruition, she said. I am joyful that I shall be by your side during all of this, master. I cannot wait to see the outcome of your goal. It shall be unlike any other. Naruto kept a blank face, before he gave a small smile. Yes, my goal is getting closer and much more possible. And soon, you won't have to hide from others anymore. You can fully be seen by my side when the time comes. He murmured. Glancing at his shadow, he saw Alucard's crimson-red eye gazing upon him lovingly, adoration and devotion in her gaze. I cannot wait for that day to come, master, Alucard said. Neither can I, Naruto murmured. Watching as the eye faded back into his shadow, the blonde stood. A scowl re-emerging on his face as he resumed his walk through the village. He kept a good pace as she strode through the village. His steps light, yet strong, fast, but paced. During his walk through the village, the blonde knew several villagers were glaring at his back, some whispering about him behind his back, while some others would be brave enough to try and bump into him as he walked. Of course the blonde dodged most of their attempts by moving out of their way. Though, for the majority of his walk, Naruto found himself trying to keep Alucard calm. The no-life queen's anger being felt by him through their mental connection. On more than one occasion, Alucard would murmur to herself, whispering about how she was going to paint the entire village red with human blood, and if there wasn't enough blood she was going to gather a shit ton of goat's blood to finish the job. Naruto also did not want to find out what she was going to do with a candy. A candy with an eye. Naruto was creative, very creative. After all, before he met Alucard he used to pull the occasional prank, and each of those pranks were creative. Yet he was dumbfounded as to what Alucard could do with a candy with an eye. He didn't want to know. He really didn't. Focusing on keeping Alucard calm, Naruto didn't anticipate that he would bump into someone when he turned the corner. Usually he would have been able to dodge the person he was going to bump into. The problem was that person wasn't radiating killing intent, so that person was automatically placed on his, not a threat meter. Looking at the person he bumped into, he raised a brow when he caught sight of the small girl rubbing her head as she sat on her rear. Closely examining the girl, Naruto noted the long dark brown hair that reached past her shoulders. The tan skin she had, and the interesting facial features she had that reminded him of someone he knew. He was simply trying to figure who he knew that shared her features. The girl seemed to be about 9, and Naruto idly wondered what she was doing wandering the village alone. Keeping a neutral face, Naruto bent down, and extended his hand to the girl. The girl rubbed her head for a few moments, before she took the blonde's hand. She gave a small yelp of surprise when the blonde lifted her to her feet effortlessly. The girl rubbed her head once more, before she raised her head, and Naruto finally realized who this girl could be related to by the sight of her eyes. Eyes that were a lavender white that had no pupils at all. A Hyuga, and not just any Hyuga, Naruto thought, with slightly narrowed eyes. Indeed, master, it's the younger sister of that stalker girl. How interesting, encountering her little sister in such a manner. Alucard chimed, before she gave off a slight demented giggle. Master, she looks like a puppy. I wonder how she'll look all bloody, she said with an insane cackle. Naruto blinked as he imagined the scene, and found himself shivering slightly at the image. Blocking the image, and placing into the never-to-be-viewed organ section of his brain, he turned his attention to the young Hyuga in front of him, who had yet to stop staring at him with a blank look. You should pay more attention to your surroundings, little Hyuga. Though, I am also at fault for not paying attention as well, Naruto stated. The small Hyuga blinked at him, before she tilted her head slightly. Her eyes examined Naruto's form up and down, before the girl gave a small frown. Are you Uzumaki Naruto? She asked curiously. Yes, indeed I am. I find myself at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I know not of yours, Naruto replied blandly, disinterest in his tone. Ah, the curiosity and innocent nature of a child. It is refreshing. Alucard chimed in. Hyuga Hanabi. My ne-san is Hinata, Hanabi stated. Yes, I figured that. Your facial features are a bit similar, Naruto responded. So what's an heiress of the Hyuga doing wandering around the village? And with no escort, no less. She's like a cat, master. She probably had an escort but ditched them or something along those lines. Luckily for her, cats have 9 lives. Alucard once again chimed in, giggling at her little joke. I did have an escort, but I evaded them to further explore on my own, Hanabi answered. Alucard, when Hitaki gives me an excuse as to why he's late, tell me a reason as to why he was late. Your uncanny ability to know what a person did before meeting me is impressive, Naruto thought with a deadpan. Alucard chuckled through their mental link in response. Oh, aren't you a curious one? Did you ever hear the phrase, curiosity killed the cat? Naruto asked lightly, his feet beginning to move him forward. Hanabi keeping pace beside him as she spoke. Yes, I have, but it's my understanding that the cat was brought back due to satisfaction. Naruto smirked slightly, hand raising to ruffle Hanabi's head. Meanwhile he did his best to ignore the feeling of jealousy that he felt flare from Alucard. A clever comeback, he congratulated. Hanabi nodded in thanks, her pupilless eyes staring at the blonde intently as they resumed their walk. Various other villagers looking on in surprise as they saw the young princess of the Hyuga clan walk alongside the object of their hatred. So little Hyuga, any particular reason why we are going in the same direction? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Hanabi briefly activated her Byakugan, the veins in her eyes bulging as she briefly the area around them. The young heiress was unaware of a single eye opening in Naruto's shadow. The crimson eye watching the girl's bulging veins in interest. Truly curious. It makes me wonder if that is painful, wouldn't you agree, master? Alucard asked in curiosity. Wordlessly, Naruto nodded. He too wondered if Hyugas ever experienced any sort of pain from activating their eyes. After all, veins bulging in your eyes could not be healthy. I am avoiding my escort. Right now they are a few blocks away in the direction we came from. Hanabi finally answered, deactivating her eyes. Oh, and you're going in the same direction I am because? Naruto once again asked. I figure I may as well learn something while I am avoiding my escort. Hanabi answered curtly. She truly is like a cat master. A very curious child, Alucard chimed, amusement dancing in the eyes of the vampiric girl. Naruto briefly smirked slightly, before he settled on a neutral look once more. Indeed, and to think she still has 9 lives to use. The blonde responded, a hint of amusement in his gaze. Naruto and Hanabi maintained a comfortable silence as they walked down the streets of the village. Finally, the two reached an intersection, and that is where they stopped. Well, little Hyuga, it's been a pleasure meeting you. But this is where we part. Naruto stated, voice neutral. Hanabi nodded. It's been a pleasure as well, Uzumaki-san, she said politely. Giving Hanabi a final nod, the blonde turned and headed off towards the direction of the red light district. Hanabi, seeing the blonde leave, faced the opposite direction before she resumed her exploration. She was sure that her escort wouldn't mind if she were out of their sight for a bit longer. It had nothing to do with the fact that she felt a little mischievous today. Not at all. Meanwhile, Naruto kept his posture of cold neutrality as he walked through the red light district. The living members of the red light district were a lot different than the other villagers who lived in the more healthy areas. Instead, the members of the red light district never glared at the blonde. Nor did they ever ignore him. At times they were friendly with the blonde. Not overly friendly, but more along the lines of they merely acknowledged the blonde's presence. When the Kyuubi attack occurred, the red light district was not too damaged from the attack. Thus, the people of the red light district had no need to hate the blonde. Instead they merely saw a boy trying to live his life just as they were. And just like them, Naruto was considered the scum of society. Despite his antisocial attitude, Naruto knew that if he ever needed help, he could depend on the citizens of the district. However, Naruto believed he would never need anyone's help. He would prefer to do things on his own. Besides, the only person that Naruto would ever allow to help him as Alucard as the no-life queen was all he needed. This line of thinking pleased Alucard immensely. Entering the door to his apartment complex, Naruto bore witness to the sight of Alucard's familiars working endlessly to keep the building clean. The multi-eyed hellhounds holding trash bags, and cleaning supplies in their mouths as their feet patted against the floor. Your familiars never cease to amaze me with their work ethic, Naruto mused, turning his head to look at Alucard as she rose from his shadow. Familiars who can't even do this much aren't worth their salt, master. Alucard stated with a grin. Only the best is worthy of you, master. I will not accept anything less. Giving Alucard a warm smile that warmed Alucard's cold heart, the blonde stepped further into his apartment, taking the stairs up to his room on the top floor. An hour or so later, Naruto stopped changing the channel to his TV as Alucard sat next to him on the couch. The long black-haired vampire queen handing her master a bowl of popcorn. She raised a hand to tilt her white hat, fixing it as she looked at with her master with loving crimson eyes. Her white attire completely contradicting her dark nature. What movie are we going to watch, master? It is horror, action, comedy perhaps, she asked, grinning as she listed some of her favorite genres. Naruto increased the volume of his TV slightly. It is horror of course. The blonde replied. You know how much I love horror movies. He stated. Alucard grinned, remembering how she had gotten her master in love with horror movies. One did not spend several years of their life with Alucard without taking some of her quirks. For Naruto, it was her love for scary horror movies. When the movie began, the two settled into a comfortable silence as the movie progressed. Halfway through the movie, Alucard titled her head with a disturbing grin. The things that humans thought up with their imaginations. Seriously, a teddy bear that comes to life due to an ancient curse, and because of that curse the teddy bear has a vicious thirst for blood as it randomly kills unsuspecting victims. Not to mention that the bear would suddenly gain a grin nearly similar to hers when she's killing something. Alucard only had one thought as she watched the rest of the movie. Where could she find a killer teddy bear? Because she wanted one. When the movie finished, Alucard merely looked at her master with crimson eyes as he stood and stretched his limbs, yawning as he did so. Well, that movie was peculiar. Naruto murmured. The concept of a teddy coming to life and killing people, while interesting, quickly became rather boring after a while, he said. Alucard hummed. I enjoyed the concept behind it, master. In fact, I dare say I'm actually considering getting a killer doll of my own. The vampire queen stated. I just need to find a perfect doll, and give it a improvement. She smirked widely, revealing her gleaming white fangs. Naruto gave a bland look, his eyebrow raising. If I wasn't already used to your antics, your curiosity and quirks may have frightened me long ago. He murmured. Hearing him, Alucard merely gave an innocent grin. As innocent as she could look anyway. Her gleaming fangs, blood-red eyes that gleamed with cruel mischief gave herself away. Anyways, I'm heading to bed, enjoy the rest of your night, Alucard. Naruto said, turning and heading towards his bedroom. Pleasant dreams, master. Alucard responded, giving her master a slight wave. Naruto gave Alucard a small smile as he wished a good night, and closed the door to his bedroom. Alucard turned off the TV and shut off the lights to living room. With nothing to do, Alucard merely stood in the middle of the room, the darkness draping over her form as she stood there with a grin on her face. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Alucard finally moved. She looked out the window, her eyes gleaming hungrily. Humming for a moment, Alucard's lower body was slowly enveloped by the shadows. I'm gonna go for a walk, she said to no one in particular. Slowly, the shadows began engulfing Alucard's form, her grin remaining as she was enveloped completely. She sank into the ground, her shadowy state merging with other shadows as she used her favorite method of travel. Through the shadows, she moved throughout the entire village, passing through every single house, and leaving several of her rat familiars as she felt mischievous. When she passed through the houses of Ino and Sakura, however, she decided to leave a larger version of her rat familiars on their bedside. And just for the heck of it, she gave them a nightmare. The screams they gave when they woke up were pleasant. The shrieks of horror and terror they gave when they saw her presence made her cackle madly. Eventually, Alucard got bored of breaking into people's house. In her eyes it wasn't really breaking in as she used shadows to enter their homes. There wasn't any law about that. To sat her newfound boredom, Alucard decided to take a stroll through the woods. After an hour or two, she came across an interesting sight. Kneeling on his knees as he panted was the form of Mizuki, or as Alucard enjoyed calling him, Dead Man Walking. In front of the Chunin was a large scroll, and from the stolen memories of the few jonin she consumed, Alucard recognized the scroll as the Forbidden Scroll of Sealing. With a growing smirk as her eyes gained a vicious glint, the white-clad no-life queen made her way behind the Chunin. Hey there, that's an awfully large scroll ya got there, she said with a large grin. Giving off an unmanly yelp of surprise, Mizuki sprang up, and backtracked away from the white-clothed vampire. His stance taking a hostile position as he glared. Who the fuck are you? Kool-Aid, Alucard answered with a large grin. Mizuki blinked. The fuck is Kool-Aid? He demanded. Alucard merely grinned. Exactly. Shaking his head, Mizuki glared at the white-clad girl, a smirk coming across his features. I don't know you the fuck you are, and I don't care. This actually gives me the perfect chance to put what I learned from the Forbidden Scroll to good use. He shouted with manic glee. Oh, Alucard murmured with a raised eyebrow. That's right, with this scroll, I now have unlimited power. And with this power, the elemental nations shall tremble at my feet as I conquer it. Mizuki shouted with a mad grin. Neat, Alucard responded, idly brushing a few of her bangs out of her eyes. But first, before I can do any of that, with a sadistic smirk, Mizuki sneered at Alucard. I am going to kill you. That would be intimidating, if you were. Well, if you were intimidating, Alucard stated with a menacing giggle. Surprised, Mizuki took a step back. Are you mocking me? He asked with anger in his tone. Oh no, Alucard began. No. PFT, yeah. With said, she thrusted her arm forward, and Mizuki couldn't react in time as her arm morphing into a shadow struck towards him at shocking speeds. One moment, Mizuki was standing, the next, he was suspended in the air, his chest pierced directly through his heart by a tendril made entirely of shadows. Choking on his own blood, Mizuki's form was brought closer to Alucard, and the no-life queen smirked widely at his suffering form. Sup? She asked causally. Mizuki gurgled. You know, normally, I would have eaten you by now. But something tells me you'll taste terribly. She said with a smirk. So instead, I'll just take this. She took the Forbidden Scroll, stashed away within her shadows. And now I'll just leave your dead corpse here for the wild animals to feed upon, okay? She grinned, patting Mizuki's cheek as the light faded from his eyes. Seeing no argument, Alucard dropped the corpse, and eagerly prepared to travel back to her master thought the shadows. She grinned as several predators began to slowly make their way towards Mizuki's body. With a giggle, she melted into the shadows, idly thinking to herself that she had a very good walk. So you were taking a walk through the woods? Naruto asked, hands folded in front of him as he stared at Alucard with an unreadable expression. Yep, you ran into Mizuki with the Forbidden Scroll. Yep, you killed him quickly, and took the scroll, leaving his dead corpse to be eaten by the wild animals of said forest. Yep, after that, you returned here, left the scroll on the table, and cuddled with me as I slept for the remainder of the night. Nodding eagerly, Alucard gave a fanged smile. Naruto looked at Alucard blankly for a few moments. All of this from an enthusiastic walk? He asked. Very enthusiastic walk, Alucard corrected. Right. Naruto deadpanned, idly wondering if, perhaps, he had been giving Alucard too much leeway. Nah, she knew when to be a good girl. Ordinarily, I would command you to return the scroll. But seeing as no one suspects where it is, I see no harm in borrowing it until I've learned all I can from it, Naruto stated, unfolding the scroll and reading it. Alucard's grin grew as she took to her master's side, her crimson orbs honing into a rather interesting technique on the scroll. Master, perhaps this technique shall interest you, she said, pointing towards the one she was gazing upon. Blinking, Naruto's eyes honed in on the one she was pointing at. He rose an eyebrow in interest and surprise. Oh, such a curious technique. Naruto smirked. It was a dark smirk, one filled with amusement that only Alucard could possess. It made Alucard feel a pleasant tingle down her spine, watching her master smirk like that as she gained a very similar smirk on her lips. Edo Tensei, interesting indeed, Naruto murmured, Alucard's eyes flashing scarlet as her grin grew. Naruto idly tapped his fingers on his desk in slight irritation. His patience, which was usually vast seeing as he took Alucard's antics in stride, was wearing very thin. He swore that if his Jonin-sensei did not enter the room within the next minute, he was going to allow Alucard to have as much fun as possible with her new toy. Oh yes, he could already imagine the torture Alucard would put that Jonin through. Naruto smirked in dark amusement. Oh yes, it would be so beautiful. Hatake Kakashi was a man whose mask of indifference was so good, even the Sandaime had a little difficulty in knowing what the man was thinking. Not many things could unnerve a Jonin of his caliber. So when he opened the door, and entered the empty classroom to meet his new apprentice, he was quite unnerved. Naruto was staring at him with a painfully neutral glare. Blank eyes expressing nothing but indifference and a small hint of distaste. Ordinarily, he would have been amused at such a genin attempting to intimidate him in such a manner. But there was something about the blonde right now that was unnerving. Suddenly, Kakashi felt cold. It was as if the literal personification of death was hanging just over his shoulder. He shivered slightly as a bead of cold sweat rolled down his neck. I dislike having my time wasted, Hatake-san. The next time you are late, I cannot be held responsible for what will occur to you. However, I will say that it will not be good for your health. Naruto's tone was neutral and curt. He said it all in a matter-of-fact manner, as if he were stating a fact. Wordlessly, Kakashi nodded, and he sighed in slight relief as the feeling of death subsided. The cold feeling remained, however. Meet me up on the roof, Naruto. With that said, Kakashi promptly disappeared within a poof of smoke. He didn't know what was going on, all he knew was that he wanted to get the hell out of there. As he disappeared, he never noticed Alucard standing behind him, a sick twisted grin on her face as the shadows around her twitched in agitation. You did good in restraining yourself, Alucard. Alucard twitched. It took a majority of my willpower to not kill the man where he stood, master. She freely admitted. Wordlessly, Naruto stood and proceeded to exit out the empty classroom. Without uttering a word, Alucard sank herself within her master's shadow as he moved forward. As he progressed through the hall, and made his way up the stairs, Naruto's mind flashed back as to how this all happened. He had entered the classroom as expected of him when team assignments were handed out. The blonde will admit that he didn't pay attention to the various names that were called. Why should he? It's not like he truly cared who his potential partners were. As long as they didn't interfere with his plans, then he would fight beside them until they proved to be a threat to his plans. Besides, no doubt Alucard had taken the liberty of listening to who was placed in what teams. So if anything, Alucard would be all too happy to inform him of the teams. It was when he was called that he truly paid attention. He was not surprised to hear that Kakashi was his teacher. He was a little surprised to hear that he was to be Kakashi's apprentice, but that surprise faded quickly. Now he had to deal with Hataki's unacceptable tardiness, and his tendency to ignore people around him. Unacceptable. Naruto knew one thing. If Hatake did not take him seriously, then Alucard may end up with another soul to add to her growing collection. You took your time in getting up here, Kakashi stated aloofly as he leaned on the railing. His eyes honed in on his book. You took your time in arriving here, Naruto calmly retorted. Touché. Not even bothering to remove his eyes from his book, Kakashi continued. Why don't we introduce ourselves? It'll make for easier cooperation if we know a little about one another. I shall only participate when you decide that my apprenticeship to you is more important than your literature. Fair enough. The masked Jonin put his book away, making sure to memorize his place, before giving all his attention to his apprentice. As you know, I am Hatake Kakashi. I will you sensei from henceforth, whilst you are now my apprentice. As you know, apprenticeships are rare. The only apprenticeships have been Orochimaru, Jiraiya of the Sannin, and of course our Sandaime whose masters were the Nadaime and Shodaime. As of now, this is the fourth apprenticeship sanctioned by Konoha. I am well aware. Good. Now, since this is an apprenticeship, the next half of the Genin exam is unneeded. However, I still want to see what you can do. So tomorrow, be at training 18 at 8 a.m. Can I expect you to arrive on time? Or shall I arrive there at 10? Kakashi eyed Naruto for a moment, his mind flashing back to Anko's threat after the blonde became his apprentice. Listen up, good Hatake. Anko had hissed. I wanted to teach the brat. I wanted to be the one the brat called sensei. And I wanted to be the one that could brag to other Jonins about my brat. So the least you could do, is take the brat seriously. If you don't take the brat seriously, then I promise you, Hatake, I am going to break into your apartment, take your precious collection of books, and burn them to the fucking ground. Evidently, Kakashi decided to take the blonde seriously. He may have been late 2 hours to meet the blonde, but as they say, old habits die hard. Still, Kakashi promised himself that he will really take the blonde seriously, and that's what he intended to do. Just in case though, he placed several traps around his apartment. More specifically, around his book collection. You could never be too careful when you're in a village full of ninja who are fully capable of fulfilling their threats. Hooray for paranoia. Quote. Be there at 10. With that said, Kakashi disappeared with a blur of movement. At the very least, he seems to be taking me a little seriously, Naruto admitted, a twinge of curiosity due to Kakashi's actions. Let us hope so, master. Should he not, I shall take immense pleasure into making him into another familiar. Alucard spoke, raising from her master's shadow. Not answering, Naruto turned, and made his way down the stairs. Come Alucard, it's time to go back home. Preparations must be made for tomorrow. Grinning, Alucard wordlessly sunk back into Naruto's shadow. Kakashi Hatake of the Sharingan was going to be very surprised tomorrow. Very surprised. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next part.